Chapter 678, C700 Talk W Madara. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Stop sign Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign.
This is my new friend, Madara Uchiha.
The word sent a shockwave through the immediate area. Itachi and Shisui's eyes widened in awe and disbelief. Tuchai and Iame, who were working in the stall, froze as they heard that name. The same reaction rippled through some of the nearby citizens who were simply walking by, unaware of the situation. Both Itachi and Shisui scrutinized Madara for a moment before turning back to Peter.
That isn't Madara Uchiha.
Shisui declared confidently.
Yeah, it can't be.
Itachi added, his tone calm but firm.
Madara Uchiha is dead. We're from the Uchiha clan. We should know about our own ancestor.
They both looked at Peter with concern.
Are you getting scammed by some old conman teacher?
Shisui asked, tilting his head. Hearing his descendants call him a conman, Madara felt a strong urge to beat the two kids in front of him. His hands twitched slightly, but he knew better than to act with Peter there. The nearby civilians, overhearing the exchange, began to murmur amongst themselves. That's supposed to be Madara Uchiha? He looks like an old beggar, one whispered.
He must be joking.
Another chuckled.
Or maybe he's gone crazy.
A few even laughed openly, pointing at Peter.
What a ridiculous claim. Madara Uchiha has been dead for ages.
Peter didn't blame these people for doubting him. After all, to the world, Madara Uchiha had been dead for a very long time. Many of them didn't even know what Madara looked like. Of course, the surrounding ninja, who had come to watch, saw the scene unfolding and immediately got to work dispersing the crowd. They were fearful that these idiotic civilians would get themselves killed by unknowingly angering two very powerful beings.
Move along, everyone.
A Jonin ordered, waving his hands.
There's nothing to see here. This isn't a spectacle.
Another added sternly.
Go back to your homes.
The crowd began to disperse reluctantly, their curiosity unsatisfied. The whispers gradually faded as the civilians returned to their daily routines, leaving Peter, Madara, and the two young Uchiha alone at the ramen stall. Madara glanced at the departing civilians, a hint of sadness in his eyes.
It seems the village has truly forgotten me.
Itachi and Shisui exchanged confused glances, still struggling to process the situation. Peter turned back to them with a reassuring smile.
Don't worry about it, you two. Let's focus on your training later.
The two young Uchiha nodded, still puzzled but trusting their teacher. They moved to sit at a nearby table, keeping a close eye on Peter and Madara. Glancing at Madara, Itachi mutters.
He does kinda look like him though.
Shisui whispered, leaning closer to his friend.
You don't really think that's Madara Uchiha, do you?
Itachi, his expression thoughtful, glanced over at Madara.
I don't know, at first I thought he was just a scammer like you said, but the more I look at him.
He paused for a moment in thought.
You know, he kinda resembles the images I've seen of Madara in my family's library. He just looks older and his hair is white.
Shisui scoffed, crossing his arms. Both Itachi and Shisui scrutinized Madara for a moment before turning back to Peter. That isn't Madara Uchiha, Shisui declared confidently. Yeah, it can't be, Itachi added, his tone calm but firm. Madara Uchiha is dead. We're from the Uchiha clan. We should know about our own ancestor. They both looked at Peter with concern. Are you getting scammed by some old conman teacher? Shisui asked, tilting his head. Hearing his descendants call him a conman, Madara felt a strong urge to beat the two kids in front of him. His hands twitched slightly, but he knew better than to act with Peter there. The nearby civilians, overhearing the exchange, began to murmur amongst themselves. That's supposed to be Madara Uchiha? He looks like an old beggar, one whispered. He must be joking, another chuckled, or maybe he's gone crazy. A few even laughed openly, pointing at Peter. What a ridiculous claim. Madara Uchiha has been dead for ages. Peter didn't blame these people for doubting him. After all, to the world, Madara Uchiha had been dead for a very long time. Many of them didn't even know what Madara looked like. Of course, the surrounding ninja, who had come to watch, saw the scene unfolding and immediately got to work dispersing the crowd. They were fearful that these idiotic civilians would get themselves killed by unknowingly angering two very powerful beings. "Move along, everyone," a Jonin ordered, waving his hands. "There's nothing to see here." "This isn't a spectacle," another added sternly. "Go back to your homes." The crowd began to disperse reluctantly, their curiosity unsatisfied. The whispers gradually faded as the civilians returned to their daily routines, leaving Peter, Midora, and the two young Uchiha alone at the ramen stall. Midora glanced at the departing civilians, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "It seems the village has truly forgotten me." Itachi and Shisui exchanged confused glances, still struggling to process the situation. Peter turned back to them with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about it, you two. Let's focus on your training later." The two young Uchiha nodded, still puzzled but trusting their teacher. They moved to sit at a nearby table, keeping a close eye on Peter and Midora. Glancing at Midora, Itachi mutters, "He does kinda look like him though."
It.
Itachi murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Seeing Midora scare his students, Peter rolled his eyes and said,
Stop scaring the kids. Aren't you supposed to be the great and mighty Madara Uchiha? Why get mad at some innocent children?
Midora scoffed, turning away from the cowering boys and back to Peter.
What now?
He asked, his tone impatient. Peter raised an eyebrow.
What do you mean? You said you wanted to get to know me so that you can decide what to do with me. We've eaten together as you wanted, so what now?
Midora's voice was edged with frustration. Peter thought for a moment, then shrugged.
I don't know.
Midora's eyes widened in surprise.
Well, this was your idea, so figure it out. Unlike you, I don't have much time left on this earth, and I would rather not waste it in this god-forsaken village.
Peter tilted his head, curiosity piqued.
Why do you hate the Leaf Village so much?
He asked, receiving a reluctant and annoyed look in return.
Look, the faster you explain, the faster I can make my decision.
Midora sighed, knowing he wouldn't be able to leave unless he gave an answer.
Fine. When the Leaf Village was just a concept, I was willing to join forces with the Senju and Hashirama. Despite the many wars fought between our clans, we became friends, sharing a common dream of a shinobi village. We built this village together and brought our clans together through our strength alone.
He paused, his eyes reflecting a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness. But things began to fall apart with Hashirama's plan to install me as the first Hokage. Despite how we ended things, that idiot Hashirama was a true friend, believing in me even though he was more loved by the people. He wanted me to lead the village, but his brother, Tobirama, had other plans. Madara's voice grew increasingly aggrieved as he continued. Tobirama incited the villagers and the other clans that joined us to support Hashirama instead, manipulating them into rejecting me. Despite Hashirama's unwillingness to lead and support for me, somehow, I never stood a chance. The people refused to follow me, swayed by Tobirama's words and Hashirama's popularity. He clenched his fists, the memories clearly still painful. But I let it go, thinking that the creation of the village was more important and that Hashirama's leadership would be beneficial. Madora's gaze turned distant as he recalled the past. As the years went by, the village prospered, but I began to see the discrimination against the Uchiha. Unlike the Senju, we weren't known for making friends. We relied on our strength, the power of the Sharingan. This made us proud, but it also made others view us as arrogant. And I admit, some of us were arrogant, but I was doing my best to fix that. I hoped that joining hands under one banner and living together would change things, but it didn't. He looked at Peter, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Our past reputation haunted us. The Uchiha were excluded from high-level positions, treated as adversaries rather than partners. The other clans and even the civilians looked at us with suspicion and envy. They saw us as an internal threat rather than allies. Madara's voice grew colder. I sensed danger in this and warned my clan, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just bitter about losing the Hokage position. He paused, his hands tightening into fists. From that day, I was treated as an outcast, even by my own clan. Soon enough, I began to grow resentful, even towards Hashirama. His expression darkened. These feelings and thoughts festered until I couldn't take it anymore. I declared war against Hashirama and became a rogue ninja. I no longer cared about the Uchiha clan. I took the Nine Tails to challenge Hashirama, and we fought in the Valley of the End. Madara's voice was filled with bitterness and a sense of betrayal.
This village turned against me, treating me like an enemy. They forgot everything we built together and everything I did for them. That's why I hate this place, and that's why I can never forgive them.
Peter listened quietly, absorbing Madara's words. He could see the pain and betrayal etched into every line of Madara's face. For the first time, he understood the depth of Madara's hatred and the reasons behind his actions.
It's not easy to let go of betrayal.
Peter said softly, his eyes meeting Madara's.
But it doesn't have to define you.
Madara scoffed, turning his gaze away.
Spare me your platitudes, the village will never change. They will always fear and distrust those they cannot control. Even today, they still ostracize the Uchiha.
Peter leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression crossing his face.
Maybe you're right.
He said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips.
But what if, just maybe, there's a chance for something new? What if you could leave your past grudges behind and start over again?
Madara raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued.
What do you mean by that? I want to recruit you.
Peter said bluntly. Madara scoffed, a dry laugh escaping his lips.
Recruit me, a dying man? I won't live past the next few months, you know. Why waste your time? Besides, I'm not much of a follower.
Peter smirked.
What if I help you with your plans?
Madara's interest was immediately piqued, though confusion clouded his features.
How do you know about my plans, or that I have any to begin with?
Peter shrugged nonchalantly.
Of course, you have plans. You kidnapped Abido for whatever reason, and you have that plant thing skulking around everywhere.
He looked Madara in the eyes, his expression serious.
Simply tell me your end goal and I'll get it done. Once it's finished, you can let go of your past, start over, and work for me. How does that sound?
Madara's eyes narrowed, suspicion mingling with temptation.
Even if I wanted to, this doesn't change the fact that I won't live past the next few months.
Peter waved his hand dismissively.
That's easy. I'll just make you young again.
Madara's eyes widened in shock.
Why, you can do that.
Peter nodded.
Yeah, it's easy. Just tell me your end goal and I'll get it done. Then you can join me and I'll make you young again. After all, I can't have my newest recruit dying of old age right after he joins me.
Madara fell silent, the weight of Peter's offer settling over him. He had spent so long chasing his dream, fighting against the world, that the idea of starting over seemed almost impossible. Yet the allure of a second chance, of seeing his plans come to fruition, was too tempting to ignore. After a moment, Madara made up his mind.
My goal is to create a lasting peace for this world. I want to free the world from pain and suffering.
Peter smirked, his eyes gleaming with excitement.
I don't believe a truly peaceful world is possible, but I think I can create something pretty damn close as long as you're willing to follow my lead. Can you do that?
Madara hesitated.
I already have a plan in motion.
He revealed. Peter shrugged.
Plans change. If you want my help, which is invaluable, you'll need to follow my lead and adapt to my methods. Besides, I'm pretty sure your plans have already failed. I have Abido, that plant thing, and you. How can you expect to complete your plans like this? Aren't you dying soon?
Madara turned silent and studied Peter for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he weighed the options. Finally, he let out a slow breath and nodded.
You make a compelling argument.
Madara admitted, his voice tinged with reluctant respect.
Perhaps my plans do need to adapt if we are to succeed.
Peter smirked victoriously.
Now, tell me all about your plans so far.
Chapter 679, C701 Madara's Idiocy. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert moron gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, /n, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S. Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. After listening intently to Madara's detailed explanation of the Eye of the Moon plan, Peter leaned back in his chair, a look of mild amusement on his face.
Wow,
Peter says, his tone carrying a hint of sarcasm.
what a wonderfully idiotic and convoluted plan.
Madara's eyes narrow dangerously.
Excuse me.
Peter continues, unperturbed by the edge in Madara's voice.
I mean, just think about it. You're basing the entire future of the world on a plan filled with holes and reliant on sheer dumb luck. Let's go over this, shall we?
Madara, feeling a rare sting of offense, listens as Peter recounts his plan, listing the glaring flaws with each step.
First off,
Peter begins ticking off his fingers.
you fake your death and somehow manage to get your hands on a piece of Hashirama's flesh, which by some miracle you integrate into your body. Then you wait, what, decades? All while banking on the hope that you might awaken the Rinnegan just before you croak. And surprise, surprise, it works. But barely.
Madara's expression darkens, but Peter presses on.
Then you implant your Rinnegan into some kid, Nagato, because…
Peter shakes his head, disbelief clear in his voice.
You did this because you needed Nagato to eventually revive you, but why not give the Rinnegan to Abido? He's an Uchiha, isn't he? Wouldn't that mean he'd have an easier time using your eyes?
He paused, an incredulous expression on his face.
You had him in the palm of your hand, completely broken and obedient, and yet you chose some random orphan instead. Makes no sense.
Madara's jaw tightens, but Peter doesn't give him a chance to respond. And let's talk about Abido. You're banking on him staying on course, following your every word once you're dead. Do you really think a kid who watched his childhood love die in front of him is the most stable person to trust with your grand plan? And what if he decided to do something else? Or what if he, like most traumatized kids, just shut down completely? Peter's voice grows more incredulous as he continues. And then there's this whole infinite Tsukuyomi thing. Trapping the entire world in a dream? Really? You think that's peace? That's not peace, Madara. That's a delusion. You're essentially forcing everyone into a coma, robbing them of their free will until the day they die of old age and calling it salvation. How does that fix anything? Madara's eyes flicker with frustration, but Peter keeps going, not giving him an inch. And what's your end goal here? To sit around as some sort of god while everyone else is trapped in their dream worlds? And then what? You eventually die and the world falls apart again, maybe even worse than before. Congratulations, you've successfully delayed the inevitable for what, a few decades? Peter finally pauses, leaning forward, his eyes locked onto Madara's. And let's not forget the biggest problem with your plan, the stone tablet. How do you know that thing wasn't feeding you lies? You've built your entire strategy on something you found carved into a rock. Did it ever occur to you that the information might be false, or that someone somewhere manipulated that tablet for their own gain? Madara, who had been silent up until now, grits his teeth, anger bubbling beneath the surface.
You think you're so clever, don't you? Mocking a plan that you barely understand.
Peter shrugs, unimpressed by Madara's indignation. Oh, I understand it just fine. It's you who didn't see the flaws because you were so blinded by your own pride and desperation. You were so consumed with the idea of being the world's savior that you didn't stop to think if any of it made sense. Madara's hand clenches into a fist, but he remains silent, knowing that Peter is right. The flaws in his plan, laid out so plainly, leave him floored. For the first time, he sees the carelessness in his actions, the risks he took that could have easily led to failure. Peter, sensing Madara's turmoil, leans back in his chair again, his tone softening slightly.
Look, I'm not saying your intentions were bad. You wanted peace. You wanted to end the cycle of pain and suffering. But the way you went about it, it was flawed from the start.
Madara looks away, the weight of Peter's words pressing down on him. His entire life's work, his grand plan, was being dismantled before his eyes. He had never considered the possibility that he could be wrong, that his strategy had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. Peter watches him carefully, giving him a moment to process.
So,
Peter finally says, breaking the silence.
what are you going to do now?
Madara remains quiet, the anger in his eyes slowly giving way to a resigned acceptance. He had no answer, no defense for the points Peter made. His plan, the one he had spent the latter half of his life building, was crumbling, and for the first time he didn't know what to do. Peter, seeing the conflict in Madara's eyes, offers a small smile.
You can still achieve peace, Madara, but maybe it's time to reconsider how you go about it.
Midora glances back at Peter, the intensity in his gaze tempered by a newfound respect.
Perhaps you're right,
He admits, his voice low but firm.
but I can't just abandon everything I've worked for. I'm not asking you to.
Peter replies calmly.
I'm asking you to adapt, to think bigger, to work with me instead of against the world. Together, we can come up with something that actually works.
Midora nods slowly, the gears in his mind turning as he considers Peter's words. It's a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that everything he's done might have been for nothing, but he knows deep down that Peter is offering him a way forward. For the first time in a long while, Midora feels the stirrings of hope, tempered by the knowledge that he has much to atone for.
Very well.
Midora finally says, his voice almost pleading.
What should we do? Well,
Peter said, stretching his arms casually.
if you're serious about changing things, there's no time like the present. Let's start the beginnings of world peace today.
Midora raised an eyebrow, curious yet skeptical.
And how exactly do you plan to do that?
Peter grinned, motioning for Midora to follow him.
We've got a meeting to crash.
Without further explanation, Peter began walking toward the Hawkage Tower, his stride confident. Midora hesitated for only a moment before getting up and following Peter, his curiosity piqued. He couldn't help but wonder what Peter had in mind and how this man intended to begin creating peace so soon. As the two walked off, Tuchai and Iam, still behind the counter of their ramen stall, exchanged glances. Little Iam's wide eyes followed the pair as they disappeared down the street.
Dad,
Iam whispered, her voice tinged with both awe and fear.
was that really Madara Uchiha?
Tuchai, who had lived long enough to know the significance of that name, nodded slowly, still somewhat in disbelief.
I think so.
The weight of the situation began to settle over the two, realizing just how significant the events unfolding before them truly were. Meanwhile, Peter and Midora continued their walk toward the Hawkage Tower. The streets of Konoha were still relatively quiet as the village recovered from the earlier chaos, though a few villagers glanced at the pair with curious eyes, none daring to approach them. Peter, sensing movement behind them, glanced back and noticed both Itachi and Shisui following at a distance, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and determination. They had tried to remain unnoticed, but their intentions were clear. Peter stopped in his tracks, turning fully to face them.
Itachi Shisui,
He called out, his tone firm but not unkind.
go wait for me back at the Uchiha district. I'll be there to train you soon.
The two boys froze, realizing they had been caught. Itachi glanced at Shisui, who shrugged, and the two reluctantly nodded in agreement. They cast wary glances at Midora, still uncertain about the man's true identity, before turning and heading back in the direction of the Uchiha district. Midora watched the exchange, a small smirk playing on his lips.
They're persistent.
He remarked. Peter chuckled.
They're good kids, just a bit too curious for their own good.
Midora said nothing in response but continued walking beside Peter, his mind still racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. He could sense the shift in his fate, the new path opening up before him, and for the first time in many years, Midora felt a glimmer of hope that things could be different. As Peter and Midora approached the Hawkage Tower, the two guards stationed at the entrance stood stiffly, their hands instinctively tightening on their weapons. But when the guards saw who was approaching, their resolve quickly melted away. They exchanged nervous glances, knowing full well who Peter was, the hero who had beaten the Nine Tails. As for the older man walking beside him, they knew exactly who he was, having witnessed his arrival just outside the village.
Madara Uchiha.
They thought, a mixture of awe and fear gripping them as they felt the overwhelming aura of power radiating from him. So, despite their training and orders, the guards stepped aside without a word, allowing Peter and Midora to pass unhindered. Midora noticed this, a smirk forming on his lips as he enjoyed the feeling of fear and respect that still followed him, even after all these years. The same pattern repeated itself as they entered the Hawkage Tower. People who might have normally stopped or questioned them chose to look the other way, pretending they didn't see the two men walking through the corridors. Some hurriedly ducked into side rooms and others simply froze in place, eyes wide with uncertainty. Finally, they reached the Hawkins office. A young, nervous secretary sat at a desk outside the door, her hands trembling as she worked. She looked up as the door to the office opened, and her eyes widened in fear when she saw Peter and Midora approaching.
Wait, you can't go in there.
She stammered, standing up quickly, trying to fulfill her duty despite her fear. Peter barely glanced at her as he continued forward.
It's all right.
He said, his voice calm and reassuring, but with a finality that left no room for argument.
They won't mind.
The secretary's mouth opened and closed as if she wanted to protest, but she found herself unable to form the words. Instead, she watched helplessly as Peter and Midora ignored her and pushed open the doors to the Hawkins office. Inside, the room was filled with tension. The cage summit that Minato had hastily arranged in the wake of the earlier events was already in progress. At the head of the room sat Minato, the fourth Hawkage, with his predecessor, the still-injured Hiruzen, standing beside him. Across from them were the other cages: Rasa, the Kazekage, Genjutsu Hazuki, the Mizukage, A, the Reikage, along with his brother B, and Anoki, the Tsuchikage. All of them looked up sharply as the doors swung open.
I thought we told them not to allow anyone inside.
Hiruzen began, his voice stern but trailing off as he recognized who it was. His eyes widened in shock as he saw Peter and Midora walk into the room. Peter smiled warmly as he looked around at the assembled leaders.
Sorry to interrupt.
He said, his tone polite yet carrying a confidence that made it clear he wasn't really apologizing.
But we'd like to join the peace talks.
Chapter 680, C702 Piece. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. As Peter announced that they would like to join the peace talks, the realization dawned on everyone present. Peter wasn't asking for permission. He was declaring it. The assembled cage understood immediately that they had no choice in the matter.
The reason we're here is simple. We want to bring the ninja world to lasting peace.
The room fell into a stunned silence at Peter's statement. The cage exchanged glances, each processing the weight of his words. Anoki, the Tsuchikage, broke the silence with a dry, cynical laugh.
Peace.
Anoki scoffed, his voice dripping with skepticism.
Lasting peace? Impossible.
Midora's eyes narrowed at Anoki's dismissal, his gaze icy and intense, causing the small, elderly cage to feel an uncomfortable chill run down his spine. The room tensed, the unspoken threat in Midora's glare palpable. But Peter remained calm, seemingly unperturbed by Anoki's reaction. He met Anoki's gaze evenly.
Why don't you think it's possible, Anoki? Can't you all act like grown men and put the past behind you? Why hold on to grudges when countless lives could be spared?
Anoki snorted, crossing his arms over his chest.
Grudges? You think this is about grudges?
He shook his head, a bitter smile forming on his lips.
You have no idea what you're talking about. The wars aren't just about old rivalries or petty grudges, though those certainly play a part. The real reason is much more pragmatic: resources.
The other cage nodded slightly in agreement, their expressions grim as Anoki continued.
Look around this room.
Anoki said, gesturing first to Rasa, the Kazekage.
Sand.
He stated flatly, his voice heavy with the weight of long-standing difficulties.
The land of wind is nothing but endless deserts. No fertile land, scarce water. The people there struggle just to survive.
Rasa, who had been quietly listening, gave a solemn nod, his eyes reflecting the harsh reality Anoki described. Anoki then pointed at A, the Reikage.
Mountains. The land of lightning is rugged, inhospitable terrain. Their people are isolated, the land difficult to cultivate. They have some resources, but nowhere near enough to support a healthy population without difficulty.
A's expression remained stern, but there was a faint flicker of agreement in his eyes. Next, Anoki gestured toward Genjutsu Hazuki, the Mizukage.
Muddy and rain. The land of water is plagued by constant storms and dense fog. Agriculture is a challenge, and the terrain is treacherous. The people of the Hidden Mist face not only external threats, but also the very land they live on.
Genjutsu nodded slightly, his expression as impassive as ever, but his silence spoke volumes. Finally, Anoki pointed to himself.
And stone, the land of Earth is barren, rocky, and infertile. Farming is nearly impossible and resources are scarce. My people work hard, but it's never enough. We are forced to fight for what little we can get because, without it, our people starve.
Anoki's voice grew more intense as he continued. All of us have our own predicaments, but Konoha, you occupy the best land in the world. Lush forests, fertile soil, abundant water, everything you could possibly need. But of course, you would never give any of it away. So we have to fight for it. We have no choice. If we don't, our people suffer, starve, and die. Our wars are about survival, not just old grudges. The other cage nodded in agreement, their faces grim. Even the Reikage, who was known for his fiery temper, seemed subdued by the harsh reality Anoki laid out. Peter listened intently, his expression thoughtful. He could see the truth in Anoki's words. The other villages were fighting not just for power or revenge, but for the survival of their people. It wasn't just about pride or grudges, it was about necessity. Anoki leaned back in his chair, his gaze hard as he looked at Peter.
It's easy for Konoha to say, let's bury the hatchet and forget the past, but it's not all about grudges for us. It's about survival. And until you understand that, there can be no lasting peace.
Peter nodded slowly, taking in everything Anoki had said. The room fell into a heavy silence as everyone awaited his response. Madara's expression was unreadable, though it was clear he was weighing Anoki's words carefully. Peter glanced at Madara, then back at the cage.
You're right, Anoki, but that doesn't mean peace is impossible. It just means we need to find a solution that addresses those needs. A solution that ensures everyone has what they need to survive without resorting to war.
The cage looked at him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. Peter had their attention.
If I can fix the resources issue,
He said, his voice calm but resolute.
Would you be willing to actually consider and work toward peace?
The cage turned to Peter, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The Reikage was the first to voice the collective doubt.
How can you possibly fix it? Unless you can persuade Konoha to surrender a portion of their land to each of us, I don't see any way to resolve this. I can give you two options. The first option is that I can assist in bringing every ninja village into the Land of Fire, where you can all share the land and make a united ninja village. This village would be governed by a council of Kage from each village who would rule together.
The cage exchanged incredulous looks, clearly stunned by the proposal. Rasa, the Kazegage, was the first to speak up, his voice filled with skepticism.
How would you possibly do that? And how do you know that Konoha would agree?
The other cage turned their gazes to Minato and Hiruzen, searching their faces for any sign of agreement. Minato's expression was thoughtful but open to hearing more, while Hiruzen's was cautious. Peter shrugged casually.
They'd have to agree, or I'd do it forcefully.
The bluntness of Peter's statement left the room in stunned silence once more. The idea that someone could force all the ninja villages into one united entity was almost unimaginable, but the sheer confidence in Peter's voice left them questioning what was truly possible. Seeing the disbelief in their eyes, Peter continued, "The second option, which is harder but still entirely doable, is that I can terraform the lands you currently live on. I can make them similar to the Land of Fire, giving you the same resources, fertile land, water, everything you need to prosper. But if you accept this offer, you must still form a council of Kage that meets regularly to solve any issues that may arise and to maintain the peace." The Kage sat in stunned silence, their minds reeling at the possibilities laid out before them. The idea of terraforming their lands, of turning barren deserts, rugged mountains, muddy rain-soaked lands, and harsh stone into something as prosperous as the Land of Fire, it was almost too incredible to believe. Anoki, the oldest and most experienced among them, narrowed his eyes at Peter.
You expect us to believe that you can just change the very nature of our lands, make deserts bloom and mountains fertile? It sounds like a fairy tale.
Peter met Anoki's gaze steadily, his expression unwavering. It may sound unbelievable, but I'm not offering you a fairy tale. I'm offering you a future where your people don't have to starve or fight for survival, a future where peace is not just a dream but a reality. but it's up to you to decide if you're willing to take that chance." The room remained silent as the cage processed Peter's words. The enormity of the offer, the sheer audacity of what he was proposing, left them grappling with their doubts and fears. Peter let the silence stretch on, allowing them time to think. He knew that what he was offering was unprecedented, something that would change the very fabric of their world. But he also knew that if they truly wanted peace, they would have to take a leap of faith. Midora, who had been silent up until now, glanced at Peter with a new sense of respect. He had never considered such a bold approach to solving the world's problems, and though he still had his doubts, he could see the potential in Peter's plan. Finally, Minato, who had been deep in thought, spoke up.
If what you're offering is possible, then I believe it's worth considering. But this isn't a decision we can make lightly. It will take time to discuss and come to a decision.
Peter nodded in agreement.
Of course, I'm not asking for an immediate decision. Take your time, discuss it amongst yourselves, and think about what's best for your people.
Anoki, still skeptical but intrigued, leaned back in his chair.
If you can truly do what you say, then it would be foolish not to consider it. But I'll believe it when I see it.
The other cage nodded, their expressions showing a mixture of hope and hesitation. The possibility of a future without war, without the constant struggle for resources, was something they had never dared to dream of. Peter smiled, sensing that they were starting to come around.
I'll give you time to think it over. But remember, the choice is yours. Peace is within your reach, but you have to be willing to take the first step.
Chapter 681, C703 Training. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert hoax gifts pics here, most likes wins police car light, /n, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. As Peter and Midora walked into the Uchiha district, a wave of tension swept through the area. The clan guards, usually stoic and disciplined, found themselves stiffening with a mix of awe and fear. Their eyes widened as they recognized the 2 figures approaching. Peter, the hero who had aided them during the Ninetales attack, was a powerful ally whose strength they had witnessed firsthand. But the man walking beside him was a different story altogether. Midora Uchiha. A name that resonated deeply within the clan, a name both revered and reviled. Midora was a legend, but also a traitor who had turned his back on the village and clan. The sight of him now, alive and walking beside Peter as if he were some sort of subordinate, sent a shockwave through the guards. They knew their duty. Midora was labeled a traitor, and technically they were supposed to bar him from entering the clan area. But who in their right mind would dare to stop Midora Uchiha? That would be suicide. The very thought of trying to halt his steps brought a cold sweat to their brows. But thankfully, Peter's presence offered them some comfort. The guards had seen Peter's power, had felt the might of his abilities during the Ninetales attack, and if anyone could keep Midora in check, it was him. So they did nothing as the 2 men walked past them, the tension in the air palpable. As they made their way deeper into the Uchiha district, passing by stores and houses along the way, the reactions of the clan members were varied but intense. Some watched from a distance, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. They whispered amongst themselves the name
Midora,
passing through their lips like a ghostly chant. Others, less bold or perhaps more fearful, immediately retreated into their homes or shops, slamming doors, locking shutters, and pulling blinds closed. Midora, who had expected such a reaction, still felt a slight pang in his chest as he witnessed it firsthand. He frowned ever so slightly, surprised by the unexpected sting of seeing his clan react to him like this. He had long thought he had severed all ties with his clan, had convinced himself that they no longer mattered to him. And yet, seeing them cower and hide, a small part of him still saw them as family that now feared him. Peter, noticing the subtle change in Midora's expression, said nothing. Instead, he quietly patted Midora on the shoulder, offering silent support. It was a simple gesture, but one that Midora found strangely comforting, though he didn't show it. As they continued walking, the tension remained thick in the air, but Peter's presence kept the situation from escalating. Madara's frown slowly faded, replaced by the impassive mask he usually wore, though the weight of the moment lingered in his mind. Eventually, they arrived at the clan head's house. Outside, Itachi and Shisui stood waiting, both dressed in their gear for training. Itachi's mother, Mikoto, was fussing over them, holding baby Sasuke in her arms as she ensured the two boys were prepared for their first day of training with Peter.
Are you sure you have everything? Kunai, shuriken, water.
Mikoto asked, her voice full of motherly concern as she checked their gear one last time.
Yes, Mom.
Itachi replied, his tone polite but slightly exasperated.
We've got everything.
Really, Aunt Mikoto?
Shisui added, trying to gently reassure her.
We're ready.
But Mikoto, ever the caring mother, wasn't quite convinced.
I just want to make sure you're both prepared. This is a huge opportunity, and you need to do your best. You don't want to disappoint Peter.
The boys exchanged glances, both of them feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Despite their growing impatience, they understood Mikoto's concerns. After all, Peter was an extraordinary teacher to have, and they wanted to make a good impression. However, their attention soon shifted as they noticed Peter and Madara approaching. The moment they saw the two figures, their conversations halted, and Mikoto's smile vanished as her eyes locked onto the imposing figure walking beside Peter. Madara Uchiha. Mikoto's breath caught in her throat, her body tensing as she instinctively pulled Sasuke closer to her chest. The warmth and joy she had shown just moments ago drained away, replaced by a deep unease as she stared at the man who was both an ancestor and a feared traitor to the clan.
Madara.
She whispered under her breath, her voice barely audible, but the two boys heard her loud and clear. Itachi and Shisui, though trying to maintain their composure, couldn't help but glance at one another, thinking.
So he really is Madara Uchiha.
Peter, noticing the sudden tension in the air, gave Mikoto a reassuring smile.
Good morning, Mikoto. It looks like Itachi and Shisui are ready for today.
Mikoto's eyes flickered to Peter, the lightness in his tone helping to steady her nerves, though the presence of Madara still loomed large in her mind.
Why yes?
She replied, forcing herself to focus on Peter.
They're ready.
But her gaze drifted back to Madara, unable to fully tear herself away from the sight of him, and the questions swirling in her mind remained unspoken. Mikoto, her voice tense with worry, asked.
Will Madara be joining in their training?
Peter, noticing her apprehension, gave her a reassuring nod.
He might.
Peter replied casually.
After all, he's probably the most powerful Uchiha alive, so his input would be helpful. But I promise you, your children will be all right.
To emphasize his point, Peter reached over and placed a hand on Madara's shoulder, pulling the older man slightly closer.
This old man is softer than he looks.
Peter added with a playful smile. Mikoto, still uneasy, turned her gaze to Madara, trying to gauge his reaction. She saw a small scowl form on his face, but to her surprise, he didn't react violently or protest. It was a bit shocking, considering Madara's reputation. This moment of restraint proved to her that, at the very least, Madara wouldn't go against Peter's words, though it didn't entirely alleviate her concerns. Still cautious, Mikoto asked.
Would you mind if Sasuke and I watch their training session?
Peter smiled warmly and nodded.
Sure, the more the merrier.
He said, understanding that her request came from a place of concern. He didn't want to add to her anxiety, especially with Madara's presence being so intimidating. With Mikoto holding Sasuke close, the group made their way to the training ground at the back of the house. The area was spacious, with plenty of room for the intense training that Peter had planned. Once they were all assembled, Peter began the introduction to the day's training.
All right, today we're going to focus on the most important part of training, your bodies.
Itachi and Shisui, who had been hoping to learn some of Peter's magic or advanced techniques, couldn't hide their disappointment. They had expected something a bit more exciting.
Without a strong body, you're just a glass cannon. Fire it once or take any damage and you're useless.
Shisui raises his hand and asks.
What's a cannon?
Realizing his mistake, Peter quickly corrects himself.
Think of it like a glass kunai. It may be sharp and usable, but it's also fragile. Throw it once and there's a high chance it'll shatter.
Both boys mutter in understanding. Peter continued.
So first, we're going to start with some light stretching to make sure you don't pull any muscles.
Both Shisui and Itachi exchanged confused glances. Stretching? They had been learning the importance of flexibility since they were toddlers. Was Peter seriously going to start their training with something so basic? Seeing the skeptical looks on their faces, Peter smirked.
Let's get started.
He said with a mischievous gleam in his eye. Before either of the boys could react, Peter snapped his fingers, and both Shisui and Itachi were suddenly lifted off the ground by an invisible force. Their eyes widened in shock as they found themselves suspended in the air, completely at Peter's mercy. Without warning, the same invisible force began to stretch and twist their bodies in odd angles. At first, the sensation was strange but bearable. However, it didn't take long before they began to feel a sharp pain as muscles they didn't even know they had were stretched to their limits. Madara, standing off to the side, watched with an amused expression, his lips curling into a faint smirk. It was clear he found the sight of the two brats being contorted in midair to be quite entertaining. The best reaction, however, came from Sasuke, who was still cradled in Mikoto's arms. The infant giggled and laughed at the sight of his brother and cousin being twisted and turned above him, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. Mikoto, on the other hand, initially looked worried as she watched her son and nephew being put through such a rigorous and unusual stretching routine. But as she observed more closely, she began to realize how beneficial this would be for them. Her concern gradually eased, though she had to fight to keep a smile from forming on her face. Sasuke's infectious laughter made it even harder to keep her composure, but she didn't want to laugh at Itachi's pain, so she maintained her serious expression. Nearly an hour passed before Peter finally muttered.
All right, that's enough.
With another snap of his fingers, the invisible force released the boys, and they were gently lowered back to the ground. Itachi and Shisui stumbled slightly as they landed, their bodies feeling like jelly from the intense stretching they had just endured.
Now we can work on your physical strength,
Peter announced just as the two boys were trying to regain their footing. Itachi and Shisui exchanged weary glances, but before they could even brace themselves, Peter snapped his fingers again, a sound they were quickly beginning to associate with something unpleasant. Sure enough, as soon as Peter's fingers clicked, a spell circle formed in the air above them and then shot down toward the ground. The moment it connected, the boys were suddenly pressed flat onto the earth, the weight of intense gravity pinning them down and sinking them into the dirt. Peter, watching with a satisfied smile, calmly instructed.
I want you to run around the training ground 5 times. Once you're done, we'll start the real training.
The two boys' eyes widened in disbelief as they struggled to push themselves up against the crushing force.
This isn't the real training.
Chapter 682, C704 Family. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow across the training ground, Peter stood over Itachi and Shisui, who were sprawled out on the ground, completely exhausted. Their bodies were drenched in sweat, their chests heaving as they gasped for air. The rigorous training Peter had put them through had pushed them to their absolute limits. Mikoto, who had been watching earlier with Sasuke in her arms, had left a couple of hours ago. Sasuke needed to eat his dinner before bed, and she also had to prepare dinner for Itachi, Shisui, and her husband, who would be home later. Although she was still wary of Madara's presence, she trusted Peter enough to leave the two boys in his care. Madara stood off to the side, observing the scene with an impressed expression. He had watched as Peter subjected the children to a hellish training regimen that far surpassed anything he had ever put Obito through. What surprised him the most was how the two boys rose to the challenge. Despite their bodies being pushed to the brink, they had persevered, never once complaining or giving up. It was a testament to their strength and determination, qualities that truly marked them as Uchiha. As Itachi and Shisui began to catch their breath, they looked up at Peter with pleading eyes.
Are
Itachi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter nodded.
Yeah, for today.
He raised his hand, bringing his thumb and middle finger together, making both boys flinch instinctively. They had learned to associate that gesture with the beginning of more pain, but when Peter snapped his fingers this time, instead of pain, they were suddenly surrounded by a soft, glowing light. The light began to heal the minor bumps and scrapes on their bodies, but it didn't stop there. The fatigue and muscle soreness from Peter's brutal training also started to fade, leaving them feeling refreshed and rejuvenated. The boys slowly stood up, their previous exhaustion all but forgotten. They exchanged surprised glances before turning to their sensei, awe and curiosity evident in their eyes.
How did you do that?
Shisui asked, his voice filled with wonder.
Can you teach us?
Itachi added eagerly. Peter smiled at their enthusiasm.
Sure, but not today. We'll get to that in time.
The boys' faces lit up with excitement. The thought of learning such abilities and possibly even more of Peter's powers filled them with anticipation. They could hardly wait for the next day's training. Peter glanced back toward the house and began to say,
If I'm not mistaken, your mother should be.
Before he could finish his sentence, the back door of the house swung open, and Mikoto stepped outside, calling out to her son and nephew.
Itachi, Shisui, dinner's ready.
She called, her voice carrying a note of motherly warmth. Peter had asked her earlier to prepare something filling, knowing that the boys' bodies would need the nourishment after the intense training. Peter pointed over his shoulder toward the house.
Go on, you two. We'll train again tomorrow.
Itachi and Shisui, ever respectful, bowed deeply to Peter.
Yes, sensei. Thank you, sensei.
They said in unison before turning and running off toward the house, their spirits lifted by the promise of delicious food. As the boys rushed past Mikoto and into the house, Mikoto hesitated for a moment before turning back to Peter.
Would you end?
She paused, glancing nervously at Madara.
Madara liked to join us for dinner.
Her invitation was polite but clearly hesitant. It was evident that she was still uncomfortable with the idea of Madara being in her home, but she felt it was only proper to extend the offer. Peter smiled warmly and waved off the invitation.
Maybe next time, Mikoto. I need to discuss something with Madara first.
Mikoto nodded, visibly relieved that she wouldn't have to host Madara in her home.
All right, thank you again, Peter.
She said before heading back inside, where she quickly turned her attention to wrangling Itachi and Shisui to the dinner table. Inside the house, the boys joined Mikoto at the table, where the warmth of family surrounded them. They ate together, their conversation lively, with Mikoto fussing over them as usual, ensuring they ate enough after such a tough day of training. As Mikoto and the kids ate inside, Peter and Madara remained outside in the backyard, the evening air cool and still. From where they stood, they could see through the window, watching as Mikoto fussed over Itachi and Shisui at the dinner table. The boys were animated, recounting their training session to her, while she gently urged them to eat more. Peter noticed a subtle change in Madara's expression as he observed the scene inside. There was a flicker of something longing, perhaps, mixed with a hint of envy. It was fleeting but unmistakable.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Peter said, breaking the silence. Madara, caught off guard by the comment, snapped out of his thoughts. He raised an eyebrow, turning to Peter.
What is family?
Peter replied with a warm smile.
Watching them together like that.
Madara's expression darkened slightly, and he frowned.
It can be.
He conceded, though his tone was bitter.
But it can also be quite ugly.
As he spoke, memories flooded his mind, memories of betrayal, of the time when his own family, the Uchiha, turned their backs on him. The bitterness of that betrayal still lingered, even after all these years. Peter nodded, acknowledging the truth in Madara's words.
Yeah, it can be. But I'm sure you had at least one family member who would have stood by you no matter what, right?
Madara's frown softened as he thought back to his little brother, Izuna Uchiha. If there was anyone in the world he could truly trust and call family, it was Izuna. The memories of his younger brother were some of the few that Madara cherished deeply, a time when they shared dreams and aspirations, before everything went wrong. A small, sad smile appeared on Madara's lips as he nodded.
Yes, I did.
He said quietly.
But sadly, he was killed by that B***-starred Tabarama.
When Madara spoke Tabarama's name, there was a growl of anger in his voice. The pain of losing Izuna was still raw, the wound never fully healed.
Izuna never trusted the Senju, but he shared the same dream as me to create a village where our clan could live in peace. Sadly, he wasn't able to see the creation of Konoha.
Madara paused, lost in thought before adding.
You know, not many people are aware of this, but those who are often think I was the one who named Konoha. But they're wrong.
His voice softened as he spoke, the anger subsiding into a kind of melancholy.
When we were still kids, Izuna and I would draw in the dirt with our toy kanai, and one day we drew our village. But when we were done, he told me to name it, since I would be the leader of the village and he would be my second in command. But I couldn't think of anything.
Peter listened quietly, sensing that this was a rare moment of vulnerability from Madara. He didn't interrupt, allowing him to speak. Madara chuckled softly, but there was a mournful edge to it.
And do you know why he named it that?
He asked, glancing at Peter. Peter looked around, gesturing to the trees surrounding them.
Because he wanted to make the village in a forest.
Madara shook his head, a bittersweet smile tugging at his lips.
No, it was because it was fall and leaves were everywhere. They kept falling from the trees, covering our drawing and getting in the way. So, since the village we drew kept getting hidden under the leaves, that's what he decided to call it.
Madara laughed, but the sound was tinged with sorrow. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his cheek. Peter reached out and rested a hand on Madara's shoulder, offering silent comfort to the old man.
Peter, we've made a decision.
Peter raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised by their quick turnaround. He hadn't expected them to come to a conclusion so soon, but speed wasn't a bad thing in this situation. He nodded, curious.
And what did you guys decide?
Anoki floated forward, his voice carrying the weight of their collective decision.
We would like you to terraform our lands, if you can actually do it.
He added doubtfully.
Although moving our villages to the land of fire would work as well, there are too many factors in place that could cause issues, mainly the daimyo.
Madara scoffed at the mention of the daimyo, though he didn't comment on it. To him, it was ridiculous that the ninja villages remained subservient to the daimyo, especially when they had the power to deal with them easily. In his mind, the daimyo should answer to them, not the other way around. Peter, though he didn't scoff like Madara, felt the same. The daimyo were a relic of the past, a factor that often contributed to the instability and conflicts in the ninja world.
Maybe I should figure out how to deal with the daimyo.
He thought.
They're a factor for war as well, but that can be handled later.
Returning to the matter at hand, Peter nodded in agreement.
Sure, I'll start working on it tomorrow. In the meantime, you all must work on setting up the council.
He said, not bothered by Anoki's doubt. The cage exchanged glances, nodding in unison. They understood the importance of establishing a governing body that would ensure the peace they sought to achieve. Minato, taking the lead, spoke for the group.
We'll begin discussions immediately and work out the details of the council. This is a crucial step, and we'll make sure it's done right.
Peter smiled, pleased with their resolve.
Good, I'll check in on your progress soon, but for now, focus on setting up a strong foundation.
Chapter 683, C705 Anoki's Shock. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert bomb gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, a /N, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S. Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. The next day.
Stop right there.
The guard barked.
State your business in Iwagakure.
Peter smiled politely, trying to keep the interaction civil.
We're here to see the Tsuchikage. He should be expecting us.
The guards exchanged wary glances, clearly not convinced.
Yeah, right.
One guard replied, his tone gruff.
Turn back, or we'll be forced to take action.
Peter's patience was wearing thin, but he kept his composure.
I suggest you double-check with your superiors. The Tsuchikage and I have an arrangement.
The guards, however, were not so easily swayed. They remained on high alert, their hands hovering over their weapons. One of them, a bit more hot-headed than the others, sneered.
You expect us to believe that a stranger and two kids have an audience with the Tsuchikage. Do you think we're fools?
Before Peter could respond, the guard who had spoken lunged forward, drawing his weapon with a swift motion.
I don't think so, outsider.
He shouted, charging straight at Peter. Peter's eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing in them. He could have killed the guard in an instant, but he tried to keep a level head.
Look, why don't we all just calm down?
He said calmly, even as the guard closed in. But the guard was too far gone, too consumed by his sense of duty or perhaps his pride. He swung his weapon with deadly intent, aiming straight for Peter's head. Itachi and Shisui tensed, their instincts screaming at them to move to protect their sensei. But before they could react, a sudden blur of movement caught their attention. Anoki, the Tsuchikage, appeared out of nowhere, his small frame moving with surprising speed and agility. He struck the guard with a powerful blow, sending him crashing to the ground, unconscious.
Fools!
Anoki barked, glaring down at the guards who had dared to attack Peter.
Do you have any idea what you're doing?
His voice was filled with fury, but also a tinge of fear. The remaining guards froze, their eyes wide with shock. They had never seen their leader so angry or so afraid. Anoki turned to Peter and immediately bowed deeply, a gesture of both apology and respect.
I apologize for their actions, Peter. They didn't know who they were dealing with.
Peter shrugged, his expression indifferent.
It's fine.
He said, though there was a hint of amusement in his voice.
No harm done.
Anoki straightened up, relief washing over his face at Peter's nonchalant response. He quickly barked orders to the nearby Anbu, who appeared in a flash, taking the unconscious guard and his shaken comrades away.
Take them to the holding cells.
Anoki commanded, his tone stern.
They need to be reminded of their duties.
The Anbu nodded and swiftly carried out their orders, disappearing as quickly as they had come. With the situation under control, Anoki turned back to Peter.
Please come in, we have much to discuss.
He then glanced at Itachi and Shisui, offering them a respectful nod.
Your students are welcome as well.
Peter nodded, motioning for Itachi and Shisui to follow as they stepped through the gates.
Our land is harsh and unforgiving,
He said, gesturing to the rocky terrain around them.
The soil here is too tough for most crops to grow, and water sources are scarce. We have to work twice as hard as other villages just to maintain our food supply.
He glanced at Peter out of the corner of his eye, a hint of skepticism in his voice despite his earlier apology.
And while I appreciate your offer, I find it hard to believe you can turn this land into anything resembling the fertile grounds around Konoha. I'm not sure anyone could.
Peter simply smiled at Anoki's doubt, taking it as a challenge rather than an insult.
Seeing is believing, Anoki. Why don't we start now?
Anoki raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but also intrigued by Peter's confidence. He had seen many things in his long life, but someone claiming they could terraform the land was new.
Very well.
Anoki replied, a slight shrug in his shoulders as he motioned for them to follow him to a side entrance of the village. They exited Iwagakure through a small gate, stepping out onto a wide expanse of barren, rocky terrain. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing but jagged stones and dust, a stark contrast to the lush greenery of Konoha. Anoki swept his arm out toward the desolate landscape.
Here you go, Peter. Let's see if your claims hold any weight.
Peter nodded, a confident grin on his face. He stepped forward, raising his hand in front of him. With a fluid motion, he conjured a golden spell circle in the air. The intricate lines and symbols of the circle began to draw themselves into completion, glowing brightly with an ethereal light. Itachi and Shisui watched in awe, their eyes wide with anticipation. They had seen Peter do incredible things before, but this was something entirely new. Even Anoki, despite his skepticism, found himself holding his breath. The spell circle shot out from Peter's hand, its golden glow spreading across the rocky terrain before them. As it struck the ground, a network of golden lines began to stretch out, weaving their way across the landscape like a web. The transformation was immediate and awe-inspiring. The hard, unforgiving rock began to soften, melting away to reveal rich, dark soil. The barren ground, once so inhospitable, now seemed to breathe with new life. Trees shot up from the earth, their roots digging deep into the freshly formed soil. Lush green leaves unfurled, stretching toward the sky as if reaching for the sun. Lakes and rivers carved themselves through the ground, their waters flowing clear and fresh. The sound of rushing water filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had dominated the area just moments before. Grass spread like a green carpet across the terrain, flowers blooming in a riot of colors as the golden lines continued to pulse with energy, transforming everything they touched. Anoki watched in stunned silence, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had doubted Peter, had been certain that no one could change the harsh landscape of Iwagakure so dramatically. But here it was, happening right before his eyes. The barren wasteland was becoming a paradise, its once harsh surface now teeming with life.
This.
Anoki muttered, his voice barely more than a whisper. Peter turned to him, a knowing smile on his face.
Nothing is impossible, Anoki. Not if you have the right tools and the will to make it happen.
Anoki could only nod, still too shocked to form a proper response. He had spent decades ruling Iwagakure, had fought countless battles and seen things that most people could only dream of, but this.
Believe me now.
Anoki, still in a state of shock, slowly nodded. Peter chuckled softly.
Just consider it a new beginning for Iwagakure. And remember, this is just the start. There's still much work to be done, but with this, you'll have what you need to begin a new era of peace and prosperity for all villages.
Anoki glanced around, his expression a mixture of awe and gratitude.
Thank you, Peter.
No problem.
Peter nodded, then turned to Itachi and Shisui, who were still staring wide-eyed at the transformed landscape.
Should we make a stop in the village to try some Iwagakure snacks before heading to the next one?
Chapter 684, C706 Daimyo. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. After leaving the newly transformed Iwagakure, which now boasted lush forests, fertile fields, and flowing water where barren rock once lay, Peter and his students, Itachi and Shisui, prepared for their next destination. The dramatic change had left Itachi and Shisui awestruck, and even Peter felt a sense of satisfaction seeing the fruits of his labor. Peter turned to his students with a smile.
All right, next stop. Let's see what we can do for the other villages.
With a wave of his hand, Peter opened a shimmering portal in the air. Itachi and Shisui stepped through with Peter close behind, and within moments they emerged in the mountainous terrain of Kumagakure, the village hidden in the clouds. The terrain here was starkly different, dominated by craggy cliffs and towering peaks, but Peter had already envisioned how he would transform this place. Raising his hand, he conjured another golden spell circle, the intricate symbols weaving together in the air before shooting out across the landscape. As the spell took effect, the rigid, rocky terrain began to soften and reshape. Mountains that had once been formidable and barren were now covered in lush greenery. Waterfalls cascaded down their slopes, pooling into clear, fresh lakes below. Peter flattened some areas to create plateaus suitable for farming, making sure not to erase the unique mountainous identity of the region but instead to enhance it, turning it into a thriving ecosystem. Itachi and Shisui watched in amazement as Kumagakure transformed before their eyes. They could hardly believe the spectacle, especially seeing the immediate change in the villagers' reactions. Those who had lived their entire lives surrounded by rock and stone now gazed in wonder at the newly fertile land. Peter nodded in satisfaction as the last of the transformations settled.
All right, 2 down. Let's keep moving.
He said, opening another portal. This time, they stepped into the mist-covered lands of Kirigakure, the village hidden in the mist. Known for its constant rain and muddy terrain, Kirigakure posed a different challenge. Peter could sense the dense moisture in the air and the sodden ground beneath his feet. Without missing a beat, Peter cast another spell, his magic taking root deep within the earth. The muddy terrain began to shift, firming up into fertile soil designed to thrive in the region's constant rain. He added enchantments to the land itself, ensuring it could channel excess water efficiently, preventing floods while retaining the necessary moisture for abundant farming. The villagers of Kirigakure, who had grown accustomed to their harsh, wet environment, were left speechless as they watched their land transform. They saw their home change from a dreary swamp to a vibrant land capable of sustaining rich agriculture.
It's like a dream.
One villager whispered in disbelief, and many others nodded in agreement, unable to tear their eyes away from the transformed terrain. With 3 villages down, Peter's final stop was the most challenging of all: Sunagakur, the village hidden in the sand. The vast desert stretched endlessly before them, the sun beating down relentlessly on the arid landscape.
This one will be the most impressive.
Peter mused, considering his options. He glanced at Itachi and Shisui, who were already anticipating the incredible transformation they would witness next. Raising his hand once more, Peter decided to go big. Originally, he had thought to create a small oasis around the village, but why stop there? With a grin, he expanded his vision. The golden spell circle formed in the air, larger and more complex than any before it, shining with an almost blinding intensity. It shot out over the desert, and immediately the change began. The sand under their feet began to shift, softening into rich, dark soil. All around them, dunes were flattened, replaced by stretches of fertile ground. Trees burst from the earth, their roots digging deep, and rivers snaked through the land, creating a network of fresh water sources that brought life to the once barren desert. Lakes appeared as if by magic, their surfaces glistening under the bright sun. Flowers and grasses spread rapidly, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the monotonous sands that had dominated the landscape for centuries. The people of Sunagakur watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with shock and awe. Many had lived their entire lives in the desert, where water was precious and food was scarce. To see their land transformed so completely, to see trees and rivers where there had only been sand, was nothing short of a miracle. Some villagers fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces as they whispered prayers of thanks, unable to contain their emotions. Others cheered and shouted, celebrating the miracle they had just witnessed. For the first time, their village was surrounded by abundance instead of scarcity. Rasa, the Kazgij of Sunagakur, approached Peter, his face a mix of disbelief and gratitude.
Thank you.
He said, bowing deeply.
You've given us more than we could ever have hoped for. We are forever in your debt.
Peter smiled and waved off the thanks.
Just doing what I said I'd do. Now, use this opportunity to build a better and peaceful future alongside the other villages.
With their mission accomplished, Peter turned to Itachi and Shisui, who were still reeling from all they had witnessed.
All right, time to head back to Konoha. We've got more work to do.
He opened another portal, and the 3 of them stepped through, returning to the familiar surroundings of their home village. As they arrived, Peter glanced around, feeling the familiar energy of Konoha.
Come on.
He said to his students.
Madara should have finished the job I gave him by now. We can probably start today's training after I hear how everything went.
Itachi and Shisui nodded eagerly, still buzzing with excitement from everything they've witnessed today, hoping that someday they would be able to do the same. Flashback earlier that morning.
Today's work terraforming the other villages will help move us closer to peace.
He began, his tone measured and thoughtful.
But there's still one group that has the power to start a war, even if the villages themselves don't want it. They need to be handled.
Madara nodded, understanding immediately.
The daimyo, right?
He asked, a hint of disdain in his voice.
Should I just kill them?
To clarify, in this world, the daimyo are the feudal lords who govern each nation. Each ninja village, despite its power and autonomy, is technically under the jurisdiction of their respective nation's daimyo. The daimyo holds significant political power and can influence decisions regarding war and peace, often without considering the wishes or needs of the villages themselves. Peter shook his head.
No, you don't have to kill them, especially if they seem like good people. Besides, if we kill every daimyo across the continent, it would draw a lot of attention and cause more problems than it solves.
Madara raised an eyebrow, intrigued by Peter's suggestion.
Then what do you want me to do? Use your Sharingan to mind control them.
Peter explained, his eyes narrowing with determination.
Make them switch roles with the villages and put it into law. The daimyo should be subservient to the villages, not the other way around. This way, the council we're creating will have the power to maintain peace. Otherwise, the daimyo could override the council's decisions whenever they want, and wars would continue, even after we leave this universe.
Madara considered this for a moment, a smirk forming on his lips.
I see.
He paused, a flash of his old ruthlessness in his eyes.
And I have no problem knocking those weak daimyo off their high horses. They've lorded over the ninja villages for far too long.
Peter nodded, satisfied with Madara's response.
Good, just make sure to handle it carefully. We don't need to cause unnecessary chaos. And remember, if any of the daimyo or their families seem like they could be problematic later on, ensure they're also brought under control.
Madara's smirk widened.
I can handle that. Consider it done.
With their plan set, Madara departed in a flash, ready to carry out his mission. Meanwhile, Peter left to pick up Itachi and Shisui, preparing to take them on their journey to the other villages for the day's terraforming. Madara's mission.
From now on,
Madara commanded in a low, authoritative tone.
you and your descendants will be loyal to the Leaf Village and serve under its command. You will support the decisions of the new United Ninja Council and never move against the village or its interests.
The daimyo nodded slowly, his face blank.
Yes.
Satisfied, Madara moved on to the daimyo's family, repeating the same process to ensure complete control. He knew that the power structure needed to be secure at all levels. With the land of fire under control, Madara moved on to the next nation. The process was similar in each palace. He would enter unnoticed, locate the daimyo, and use his Sharingan to bend their will to the new order that Peter had envisioned. At the Palace of the Land of Water's daimyo, Madara found the lord and his family having dinner. A flicker of annoyance crossed Madara's face at the sight, but he swiftly moved into position. In a matter of seconds, all their eyes were locked on his, the Sharingan's power overwhelming their minds.
You will now serve the Mist Village and follow the council's directives.
Madara instructed.
Your role is to support the ninja, not to command them. Yes.
Chapter 685, C707 Hawkage's Request. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert terror gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, /N, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S. Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. As the portal shimmered and closed behind them, Peter stepped out into the Uchiha district alongside Itachi and Shisui, the soft orange glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the village. The streets were quieter now, the day winding down as families prepared for dinner, and the sounds of evening life filled the air. Peter glanced around, expecting to see Madara somewhere in the distance, but there was no sign of him. It seemed Madara hadn't returned yet from his task, which Peter had anticipated would take most of the day. Noticing that Madara wasn't around, Itachi turned to Peter, his expression thoughtful.
Sensei, would you like to join us for dinner? My mom should be cooking by now.
Itachi asked, his tone polite but hopeful. Shisui, standing next to Itachi, nodded eagerly, clearly looking forward to having their teacher join them for a meal. Peter opened his mouth to respond when, out of nowhere, an Anbu appeared beside them in a blur of motion, nailing with a bow.
Sir.
The Anbu began, his voice respectful but urgent.
Hawkage-sama requests your presence. He asks that you meet with him as soon as possible.
Peter shrugged, completely unfazed by the sudden appearance.
Sure, tell Minato that I'll be there soon.
The Anbu nodded and disappeared just as quickly as he had arrived, leaving Itachi and Shisui staring after him in silence. Turning back to his students, Peter smiled reassuringly.
I'll meet with Minato first, but don't worry, I'll join you both for dinner afterward.
Itachi and Shisui smiled at his response, bowing in respect.
We'll see you soon, Sensei.
They said in unison before rushing off toward Itachi's home, eager for dinner and the chance to unwind after the day's excitement. Peter watched them go, a fond smile tugging at his lips. Once they disappeared from view, he turned toward the Hawkage Tower, his thoughts shifting toward whatever business Minato had for him.
Well, let's see what Minato wants to talk about this time.
Peter mused to himself, taking a step forward as he prepared to head toward his meeting with the Hawkage. Peter walked through the corridors of the Hawkage Tower, his footsteps light and unhurried. Soon enough, he reached the door to Minato's office and knocked lightly. A moment later, he heard Minato's voice from the other side.
Come in.
Peter pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was lit softly by the setting sun, the rays highlighting the shelves filled with scrolls and books lining the walls. Behind the desk sat Minato, the fourth Hawkage, his usual calm and determined demeanor in place. Beside him stood his wife, Kushina, her long red hair falling over her shoulders. She smiled warmly when she saw Peter. In a small cradle behind the desk, baby Naruto slept peacefully, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. The sight of the sleeping child softened the room's atmosphere, but Peter could immediately sense the tension in Minato and Kushina's posture. Minato gestured for Peter to take a seat, and once Peter was settled, Minato leaned forward, his hands clasped together.
I appreciate you coming, Peter.
Minato began, his voice calm but with an undertone of curiosity.
I wanted to ask how everything is going with the other villages. How's the terraforming coming along? I know it's a massive task.
Peter smiled casually, leaning back in his chair.
It's already done.
Minato blinked, caught off guard by the response.
Already?
Kushina too seemed surprised, her brows raising in disbelief.
That fast? We thought it would take weeks, maybe even months, to transform all the villages.
Peter chuckled softly, shaking his head.
Nope, it took a day. I hit Kumagakure, Kirigakure, and Sunagakure after Iwagakure. The mountains are lush and fertile, the rain-soaked lands of the Mist Village are thriving, and the desert surrounding Sunagakure.
Minato and Kushina exchanged stunned glances, both struggling to process the sheer scale of what Peter had accomplished in such a short time. Minato's lips parted as he tried to grasp the enormity of the task.
I don't know what to say.
Minato admitted, leaning back slightly in his chair.
That's incredible.
Kushina, still looking somewhat amazed, nodded.
You've really done something amazing, Peter. Those villages will be thriving in no time.
Peter nodded, a sense of satisfaction in his voice.
Yeah, the hardest part is out of the way. Now we just have to wait for Madara to return from his task with the daimyo.
At the mention of Midora and the daimyo, both Minato and Kushina's expressions shifted. A bad feeling seemed to creep into the room. Minato frowned, his concern evident.
Wait!
Kushina's eyes narrowed slightly.
Is that really a good idea? You know what kind of man Madara is.
Peter waved a hand dismissively, not appearing the least bit concerned.
It's fine, he's not going to kill them if that's what you're worried about.
Kushina, still looking uneasy, exchanged a glance with Minato.
But what is he doing with them, exactly?
Peter shrugged, leaning forward slightly.
He's just mind-controlling them to shift the power dynamic. They'll still technically be in charge of their respective lands, but now they'll be subservient to the villages, not the other way around. We need that to ensure the new council has real authority. The last thing we want is for the daimyo to keep overriding the council's decisions and causing conflicts.
Minato sighed, though he seemed somewhat reassured.
I understand the reasoning.
Peter nodded.
Madara will handle it. He's more than capable, and he knows how important this is.
Kushina still looked a little uneasy, but she seemed to accept Peter's explanation.
I hope you're right, Peter.
Peter smiled.
I am.
With that, the conversation shifted, and Peter noticed the serious expressions on Minato and Kushina's faces. Minato hesitated for a moment before speaking again.
Actually, Peter, there's another reason we called you here.
Minato said, his tone growing heavier. He glanced at Kushina, who nodded, silently urging him to continue. Peter raised an eyebrow, curious.
What's going on?
Minato sighed, leaning forward with his elbows resting on the desk.
It's about Abide.
He began, his tone serious but laced with a hint of frustration.
We've been trying to help Abido ever since you helped us capture him. I've tried talking to him, reminding him of the old days, of everything we fought for together.
Peter leaned forward slightly, listening intently.
But nothing seems to be working.
Minato continued.
He's not the same boy we knew. Whatever he went through has changed him, his ideals, his beliefs.
Kushina nodded in agreement, her brow furrowed with worry.
We've even had the Yamanaka clan try to get through to him using their mind techniques, but even they're struggling. It's like there's this wall around his mind, and nothing is getting through.
Minato sighed, running a hand through his blonde hair.
I hate to ask you for more help after everything you've already done for the village, but we're at a loss. We need your help, Peter. I don't know what else we can do.
Kushina's eyes met Peter's, and Peter could see the pleading in them.
Please, Peter.
She said softly,
If anyone can help us reach Abido, it's you. We just want to bring him back.
Peter looked from Minato to Kushina and back again.
I'll help.
He agreed easily. Minato and Kushina both let out a breath of relief, their tense shoulders finally relaxing.
Thank you.
Minato said, gratitude clear in his tone. Kushina nodded eagerly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips.
We knew you'd be able to help.
It's no problem.
Peter smiled back.
There are a few ways we could go about it. I'll lay out the options for you, and you too can decide which route you want to take.
Minato and Kushina exchanged a glance, excitement and curiosity building between them.
What are the options?
Minato asked, leaning forward slightly, eager to hear what Peter had in mind. Peter held up one finger.
The first option is the most straightforward but comes with some complications. I could erase Abido's memories completely, wipe them out. This would give him a second chance at life without the trauma, brainwashing, or any of the baggage he's carrying right now. He'd have a fresh start.
Kushina and Minato's eyes widened at the idea, and for a moment they looked hopeful. But then Minato furrowed his brow, sensing that there was a catch.
That sounds promising, but
Peter sighed.
the problem is that while it would give him a clean slate, he probably wouldn't be able to stay in Konoha. Too many ninja here know his face. Word would spread quickly among the villagers, and people would remember that he was involved in the Nine-Tails attack. Even if he didn't have his memories, others would, and it would make things.
Kushina's expression faltered, and Minato frowned, understanding the gravity of the situation.
That could be a real issue.
Minato murmured, glancing at his wife.
He'd always be seen as a threat, no matter how much he's changed.
Peter nodded.
Exactly. Even if he's no longer the same person, the village might not be able to see past what he did.
Kushina pursed her lips, clearly troubled by the potential fallout.
What's the next option?
She asked. Peter held up two fingers.
The second option is a bit more traditional. We can help him the old-fashioned way with therapy, support, and guidance. It's the slowest method, but would allow him to work through everything at his own pace.
Minato nodded thoughtfully.
How long would that take?
Peter gave a small, apologetic shrug.
It's hard to say. Therapy takes time, and with the level of trauma he's gone through, it could take years to see any real progress. And honestly, I don't have that kind of time to stick around and see it through.
Kushina bit her lip, her gaze shifting to the cradle where Naruto slept peacefully. She wanted to help Abido, but she knew Peter had his own obligations.
Would we be able to handle it without you?
She asked, her voice soft but filled with determination. Peter smiled reassuringly.
I'd make sure you're well equipped before I leave. I'd help set everything up, give you the tools and resources to work with. But yeah, I'd have to leave before things really started to show progress.
Minato looked conflicted, understanding that while this option was the safest, it was also the longest and most uncertain. He turned to Kushina, waiting to hear her thoughts. Peter held up 3 fingers now, signaling the last option.
The third and final option is a bit more extreme, but it could solve most of the issues we're facing. I could use my powers to revert Abido back into the body of a child and erase his memories, like in the first option. That way, no one would recognize him, and he could have a completely fresh start, no baggage, no bad memories, and no reputation to follow him around.
Kushina's eyes lit up at this option, the idea of giving Abido a true second chance without any of the weight from his past clearly appealing to her.
That's it.
She said immediately, her voice firm.
Let's do that.
Minato blinked, surprised by her quick decision.
Kushina.
Kushina turned to Minato, her expression incredulous as if the answer were obvious.
We will, of course.
Chapter 686, C708 Fox Recruitment. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. As Peter stepped out of the office, leaving Minato and Kushina to discuss their decision regarding Abido, he couldn't help but smile. From the way the conversation was going, it was clear that Kushina had already made up her mind, and Minato would soon follow. The prospect of giving Abido a true second chance, free of his past, was too appealing to pass up. Stepping into the cool evening air, Peter took a deep breath. The village was quiet at this time of night, and the stars twinkled faintly above him. It was peaceful.
Mission accomplished.
Madara said, his voice low and confident.
Every daimyo is now subservient to the ninja villages, just as you asked. More importantly, they'll all follow the orders of the future council without question.
Peter raised an eyebrow, a grin forming on his face.
That was fast.
Madara shrugged.
It wasn't difficult, they were all too weak to resist and none of them suspected anything. Everything went according to plan. Good.
Peter nodded satisfied.
That was an important step. Now we can focus on building the council and solidifying a lasting peace.
With their tasks for the day complete, Peter gestured for Madara to follow him.
Come on, Itachi invited me to dinner at his house, and I figured we could both go.
Madara raised an eyebrow at the invitation, a rare look of curiosity crossing his features.
Dinner with the Uchiha clan.
Peter chuckled.
They might be a little scared at first, but don't worry. You're with me, so they'll get used to it. Besides, Mikoto invited us last time.
With that, the two men made their way to the Uchiha district, the streets quiet and deserted as the village settled down for the night. As they approached Itachi's house, Peter could already sense the tension in the air. He knew bringing Madara along would cause some unease, but he figured the dinner would help break down some of those barriers. When they arrived at the house, the door was opened by Mikoto, who immediately tensed at the sight of Madara standing beside Peter. She quickly composed herself, offering a polite smile despite the clear apprehension in her eyes.
Good evening, Peter.
Mikoto greeted warmly before her eyes flickered nervously toward Madara.
And?
Peter smiled reassuringly.
I hope it's all right that I brought him along. We're all working toward the same goal after all.
Mikoto hesitated for a moment before nodding.
Of course, you're both welcome.
They stepped inside and Peter could sense the immediate shift in the room's atmosphere. Fugaku, who had been sitting at the table with baby Sasuke in his arms, stiffened at the sight of Madara, his eyes narrowing slightly. Itachi and Shisui, who were already seated, exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to react to this.
Thanks for having us, Fugaku Mikoto. The food smells great.
Mikoto offered a polite nod, quickly setting the table with the meal she had prepared. As they began to eat, the atmosphere remained tense for the first few minutes, everyone stealing glances at Madara, who sat silently, his expression unreadable. But as the dinner went on, Peter and Madara made no moves to escalate the situation. In fact, Peter engaged in casual conversation with Itachi and Shisui about their training, while Madara remained mostly quiet, offering the occasional comment. Slowly, the tension began to ease as it became clear that neither Peter nor Madara had any intention of causing trouble. By the time dinner was coming to a close, the atmosphere had lightened considerably. Fugaku, though still wary, seemed to relax slightly, and even Mikoto managed a small smile as she cleared the dishes. Peter leaned back in his chair, glancing at Madara.
See, I told you it'd be fine.
Madara merely smirked in response. As the meal wrapped up, Peter and Madara thanked their hosts and didn't overstay their welcome. Mikoto, ever the gracious host, offered Peter a place to stay for the night as she had done before, but Peter shook his head with a smile.
I appreciate the offer, Mikoto, but I don't want to impose. Minato already gave me a house, so I'll just stay there from now on. Besides, I'll be back tomorrow for the kids' training. It's not like I'll be gone for long.
Mikoto nodded in understanding, though there was a hint of relief in her expression, especially considering Madara's presence.
Thank you again for dinner.
Peter said as he and Midora stepped out into the cool night air. The streets of the Uchiha district were quiet now, the village settling into the calm of the evening. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps the only noise breaking the silence, Midora spoke up.
I've been thinking.
Midora began, his voice low and thoughtful.
About the eyes I gave that Uzumaki kid Nagato.
Peter glanced over at Midora, his curiosity piqued.
What about them?
Midora's eyes narrowed slightly.
My old plans are being thrown out, which means I don't need to be without my original eyes anymore. I was thinking of retrieving them tomorrow.
Peter's interest deepened. He had always been curious about Nagato and the Akatsuki.
Mind if I tag along?
Midora glanced at Peter, considering the offer for a moment before nodding.
Fine by me.
Peter grinned, clearly intrigued by the idea.
Cool, maybe I'll bring the kids along as well.
With that, the two men went their separate ways, their thoughts already turning to the events of the next day.
I wonder if Yahiko is still alive.
Peter stood before his new home, taking in the sight of the large, sprawling mansion that had been given to him as a gift from Minato and the village. When Minato had told him it was just a
small house,
Peter had shrugged and accepted, thinking it would be a modest place to rest. But now, seeing it in person for the first time, he realized Minato's idea of
small
was wildly different from his own.
This.
Peter muttered to himself, sighing as he stared up at the towering structure before him. The mansion's elegant design and expansive grounds made it clear that this wasn't just a place to sleep, it was a full-blown estate. Still, Peter let out a resigned sigh, deciding to just roll with it.
Guess it's better than sleeping in someone else's house,
he said with a shrug before heading inside. The interior of the house was just as grand as the exterior. Polished floors, intricately carved woodwork, and spacious rooms greeted him as he wandered through the hallways. Despite its grandeur, the place felt oddly empty, with only the faint echoes of his footsteps filling the silence. After some exploring, Peter eventually found what he assumed was the master bedroom. He pushed open the door and stepped inside, already mentally preparing to collapse into bed after the long day. But as soon as he entered the room, he froze. Sitting on the bed with a thoroughly annoyed expression on his face was none other than Kurama the Ninetails himself, still trapped in his tiny, shrunken form thanks to Peter's spell.
Yo!
Peter greeted casually, trying not to laugh at the sight of the once mighty beast looking so disgruntled in his miniature state. Kurama let out a low growl, clearly unimpressed.
Don't yo me!
The fox grumbled, his red eyes narrowing as he glared at Peter.
You're late.
Peter raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe.
Late? I didn't realize I was on a schedule.
Kurama huffed, his tails swishing behind him in agitation.
I've been stuck like this, waiting for you to come back, while you've been gallivanting around the other villages, getting all cozy with Madara Uchiha of all people.
Peter's eyes gleamed with amusement.
So that's what this is about. You're upset about Madara becoming my subordinate.
Kurama's ears flattened against his head, his expression hardening.
Madara is dangerous, Peter. I should know that better than anyone. He's not someone you can trust.
Peter crossed his arms, letting out a soft chuckle.
Madara's dangerous, sure, but so am I.
Kurama bared his fangs slightly, his frustration bubbling to the surface.
You don't get it. I've dealt with Madara before. He's a manipulator, and he'll stab you in the back the moment it's convenient for him.
Peter tilted his head, watching Kurama intently.
I hear what you're saying, but from what I've seen so far, Madara's not out to betray anyone. He's just a man who wanted peace, and he took the wrong steps to get there.
Kurama scoffed, his eyes flashing with disbelief.
You really believe that, after everything he's done?
Peter shrugged.
I believe people can change, given the right circumstances. And even if Madara does try something, I'm not exactly easy to stab in the back. He's not strong enough to take me down.
Kurama's frown deepened, but he couldn't deny the truth in Peter's words. He had seen Peter's strength firsthand, and it was nothing short of monstrous. Still, the thought of Madara made Kurama's fur bristle.
I don't trust him.
Kurama muttered, his voice low and filled with a deep-rooted grudge. Peter smirked, an idea forming in his mind.
Well, since you don't trust the old man so much, how about this? Why don't you join me? You can watch my back and make sure Madara doesn't try anything. If he does turn on me, I'll even let you take him down yourself.
Kurama's eyes widened slightly at the offer, a flicker of intrigue crossing his features.
You'd let me kill him?
He asked, his tone cautious, as if trying to gauge whether Peter was serious. Peter grinned.
If he betrays me, sure. I don't think it'll come to that, but if it does, you can have the honor.
Kurama seemed to mull over the idea for a moment, though his skeptical nature kept him from jumping at the offer right away.
I thought you wanted me to be Konoha's guardian beast, or whatever.
Kurama said, raising an eyebrow.
Why are you offering me this instead?
Peter shrugged again.
That was just advice. Now I'm giving you a job offer. You can join me as well, keeping an eye on Madara and protecting me from anything he might try.
The offer clearly piqued Kurama's interest, but there was still one stipulation he had.
If I agree to this,
Kurama began, his gaze narrowing slightly.
you have to remove this spell that keeps me shrunken like this. I'm not doing anything as long as I'm stuck in this ridiculous form.
Peter chuckled, raising a hand in agreement.
Deal!
With a snap of his fingers, the spell that had kept Kurama in his tiny form was lifted. Of course, he held off on growing right away, conscious that it would cause the house to collapse. Kurama let out a satisfied growl, stretching his limbs as he regained control of his full size.
That's better.
Peter smiled as he watched the Ninetales settle into his larger form.
Now, let's fix your mind control problem.
Chapter 687, C709 Aimgakure. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert Buddha gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, /n, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S. Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. The next day, Aimgakure, the village hidden in the rain.
It's over, Conan.
Hanzo said, his voice calm and measured.
Don't make this harder than it has time be.
Conan glared up at him, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps.
If you think Yahiko and Nagato will just surrender to you, you're mistaken.
She spat, her voice filled with defiance. Hanzo shook his head.
I don't want them to surrender.
He pauses, looking Conan in the eye.
I want them to die.
At his signal, more of his guards appeared, lifting Conan's chained body off the ground and dragging her away. Conan struggled, her mind racing as she tried to think of a way out of this, Hanzo's ominous declaration replaying over and over in her head.
What do you want, Hanzo?
Yahiko demanded, his voice cold and filled with barely contained rage.
Why do you have Conan?
Nagato, his expression equally dark, narrowed his eyes at the older man, his chakra flaring uncontrollably as his emotions threatened to take over. The sight of Conan, one of his dearest friends, bound and helpless before them, was more than he could bear. Hanzo dismounted from his salamander, walking slowly and confidently toward Yahiko and Nagato, his eyes cold and calculating as he surveyed the 2 leaders of the Akatsuki. His elite ninja forces stood at the ready behind him, their weapons drawn and prepared for battle, but Hanzo himself remained calm, knowing he held the upper hand.
I believe you already know why I'm here.
Hanzo began, his voice even and composed despite the obvious tension in the air.
The Akatsuki has become a threat to Aimgakure.
Yahiko's jaw tightened, his anger boiling beneath the surface.
We've only ever worked to bring peace to this land, to end the constant wars that plague our country, and you know that.
Hanzo's lips curled into a bitter smile.
That may have been your intention in the beginning, Yahiko, but your influence has grown too strong. Your ideals are dangerous. They attract too many followers, too much attention. The balance of power is shifting, and I cannot allow that.
Nagato stepped forward, his voice trembling with barely suppressed fury.
You captured Conan to lure us out. What is it you really want, Hanzo?
Hanzo's smile faded, and his eyes grew cold as he raised a hand, signaling his men to bring Conan forward. Hanzo held Conan up, so Yahiko and Nagato could get a good look at her, her wrists bound tightly in chakra-suppressing chains. She struggled in his grasp, her eyes locked onto her two closest friends. Hanzo stepped closer, his expression hard as steel.
It's simple, I want both of you to die.
Yahiko and Nagato exchanged stunned glances, disbelief flashing across their faces, but Hanzo wasn't finished.
You say,
Hanzo continued, his voice dripping with malice.
as long as you two live, your influence will continue to grow. The people will follow you, I can't allow that.
He reached into his cloak and drew a kunai, holding it up so that the light glinted off its sharp edge.
So here's the deal. Yahiko, Nagato, you will both kill yourselves. Do it willingly right here, right now in front of me, or...
He glanced toward Conan and without hesitation, placed the blade of the kunai against her neck.
If you don't, I'll cut off her head right in front of you.
Yahiko's heart seized in his chest as he saw the blade pressed dangerously close to Conan's throat. His mind raced, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He knew Hanzo was serious, there was no bluff in his voice. If they didn't comply, Conan would die. Nagato, on the other hand, felt his blood boil as his Rinnegan flared with intensity. His rage threatened to consume him entirely. The sight of his closest friend in such a perilous position ignited a fire within him that demanded action, demanded vengeance.
Stop this, Hanzo!
Yahiko shouted, taking a step forward, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and desperation.
There has to be another way. You don't have to do this.
But Hanzo shook his head, his expression cold and unyielding.
This is the only way, Yahiko. You've left me no choice. If you truly care about Conan's life, you will do as I say.
The kunai pressed harder against Conan's neck, drawing a thin line of blood as it grazed her skin. She winced but remained silent, her eyes filled with defiance as she looked toward Yahiko and Nagato. She was prepared to die for them, for their cause, but she couldn't bear the thought of them sacrificing themselves for her. Nagato's chakra flared dangerously as he took a step forward, his voice low and filled with barely controlled fury.
If you harm her,
Hanzo's lips curled into a twisted smirk.
Oh, I'm sure you would, but that won't matter if you're dead.
Yahiko's mind raced as he tried to find a solution, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what Hanzo was asking of them, and he knew there was no easy way out of this. But one thing was clear, he couldn't let Conan die. With a deep breath, Yahiko's eyes softened as he looked at Conan, then at Nagato.
It's okay.
He whispered, his voice filled with a quiet resolve.
We'll find a way out of this. We can. Enough talking.
Hanzo said, his voice cold and merciless.
Either you kill yourselves now, or she dies.
Nagato's heart raced, and for the first time, he could feel a heavy sense of dread settling in his gut. His Rinnegan flared with uncontrollable emotion as the blade inched closer to Conan's neck. Yahiko's resolve was breaking. He was no fool. He knew that there was no escaping this situation without someone dying. His mind screamed at him to find another way, to fight back, but the cold steel of Hanzo's blade against Conan's neck brought the cruel reality crashing down. Yahiko glanced at Nagato, his friend's face contorted with barely contained rage.
Nagato!
Yahiko began, his voice thick with emotion. Nagato shook his head violently.
Don't do it, Yahiko. There has to be another way.
But Yahiko's eyes softened, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision.
I can't let her die, you know that.
Hanzo smirked, his grip tightening on the sword as he leaned closer to Conan.
Enough stalling.
He growled.
Make your choice now, or I'll end her life right here.
Yahiko's hand trembled as he reached for a kunai from his pouch. Nagato's eyes widened in disbelief, but he knew Yahiko was serious. His best friend was about to sacrifice himself to save Conan. Just as Yahiko raised the kunai, ready to plunge it into his own heart, the rain seemed to stop for a moment, and the air around them crackled with energy. Suddenly, without warning, a golden, glowing circular portal appeared in the space between Yahiko, Nagato, and Hanzo's forces. The portal shimmered with a strange energy, and the air hummed with power as it opened wider, and from it stepped small groups of unfamiliar individuals. Peter, along with his students Itachi and Shisui, Midora Uchiha, and Kurama in his now slightly larger form, emerged from the portal. But the gravity of their entrance was immediately undercut by the bickering that accompanied them.
I swear, Madara.
Kurama growled, his deep voice filled with irritation.
If you keep walking in front of me like that, I'm going to swat you like a fly.
Madara shot an annoyed glance at the Nine Tails.
It's a free world, Fox. I can walk wherever I want.
Peter rolled his eyes as he stepped between the two.
Can you two knock it off for 5 minutes? We're in the middle of something here.
Hanzo, Konan, Yahiko, Nagato, and every ninja present stood frozen in place, utterly dumbfounded by the sudden arrival. Even Hanzo, who had prepared for every possible contingency, was left speechless by the bizarre scene unfolding before him. Nagato's Rinnegan eyes flared as he instinctively took a step back, unsure of what was happening. Yahiko, still holding the kunai, looked between the newcomers and Hanzo, his mind racing to catch up. Hanzo narrowed his eyes, trying to size up the strange group.
Who?
He demanded, his voice filled with suspicion and barely concealed irritation. Peter, hearing Hanzo's question, waved his hand in greeting.
Yo, I'm Spiderman.
Chapter 688, C710A Quick Lesson. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 14 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. The rain continued to pour as Peter and his group made their sudden and dramatic entrance through the golden portal. Hanzo's forces, along with Yahiko, Nagato, and the Akatsuki stood frozen in place, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. After all, portals weren't a normal sight in this world, and the idea of someone using such a method for transportation had everyone on edge. Nagato tried to process what had just happened, his mind racing, trying to figure out who these people were and how they had managed to appear in the middle of such a critical moment. Yahiko, kunai still in hand, glanced between Hanzo, who looked equally stunned, and the newcomers. Hanzo, always calculating and cautious, narrowed his eyes as he studied the group. His elite guards shifted uneasily behind him, their weapons ready but their movements hesitant. The sudden appearance of such an unknown force had thrown them off balance.
Who?
Hanzo growled, his voice cutting through the rain. His grip tightened on Konan as he held her hostage, clearly not willing to let go of his advantage so easily. Peter, standing casually with his hands in his pockets, simply smiled.
Yo, I'm Spiderman. Nice to meet you.
He said, giving a little wave with his free hand, as if this were a completely normal introduction. His relaxed demeanor only added to the confusion spreading through the crowd. Yahiko, still on edge, shot a glance at Nagato, who returned it with a silent, questioning look. Neither of them had any idea what was happening, but they knew that whoever these newcomers were, they had just turned the situation upside down. Hanzo's brow furrowed in suspicion.
I don't know who you are or why you're here.
He said coldly, his voice dripping with malice.
But this has nothing to do with you. Leave now and I'll spare your lives.
Peter's smirk widened slightly. After all, portals weren't a normal sight in this world, and the idea of someone using such a method for transportation had everyone on edge. Nagato tried to process what had just happened, his mind racing, trying to figure out who these people were and how they had managed to appear in the middle of such a critical moment. Yahiko, kunai still in hand, glanced between Hanzo, who looked equally stunned, and the newcomers. Hanzo, always calculating and cautious, narrowed his eyes as he studied the group. His elite guards shifted uneasily behind him, their weapons ready but their movements hesitant. The sudden appearance of such an unknown force had thrown them off balance. Who?
Don't go falling in love now.
He teased, his voice light and playful.
I'm already taken.
Konan blinked, the blush on her cheeks deepening as she realized she'd been caught off guard. She quickly averted her gaze, mentally scolding herself for being distracted at such a critical moment. But even as she turned her attention back to the situation, the suddenness of the move left everyone stunned. Yahiko and Nagato stared in disbelief, their eyes flickering between Hanzo and Peter as they tried to comprehend how he had managed to take Konan so effortlessly. Hanzo, for his part, was seething. His plan had been going perfectly until this moment, and now it was crumbling before his eyes. He glared at Peter, fury boiling beneath his calm exterior.
You think you can just walk in here and interfere with my plans?
Peter shrugged, still holding Conan carefully as he glanced back at Hanzo.
Well, I just didn't I?
He smirked.
What are you going to do about it?
Behind him, Madara snorted out a laugh, watching the scene with mild interest, while Kurama grinned, clearly amused by Hanzo's frustration. Itachi and Shisui remained silent, their eyes trained on Peter, absorbing every detail of how their sensei handled the situation. Meanwhile, Conan still couldn't quite process what had happened, her mind reeling as she clung to Peter, still in his arms.
Conan!
Yahiko and Nagato's voices broke through the confusion, both of them shouting her name as they watched her being taken from Hanzo's grasp. Nagato's Rinnegan eyes flared with intensity, despite his inability to use them, his chakra surging as he instinctively stepped forward, ready to intervene if necessary.
Are you all right, Conan?
He called out, his voice strained with worry. Yahiko's gaze darted toward Peter, his expression cautious but grateful.
Whoever you are, thank you for saving her, but
His voice trailed off, his uncertainty clear.
Please return Conan to us. We don't know who you are, but if you're here to help.
Peter, holding Conan securely, turned his head to Yahiko with a casual smirk. Yahiko and Nagato's voices broke through the confusion, both of them shouting her name as they watched her being taken from Hanzo's grasp. Nagato's Rinnegan eyes flared with intensity despite his inability to use them, his chakra surging as he instinctively stepped forward, ready to intervene if necessary. Are you all right, Conan? He called out, his voice strained with worry. Yahiko's gaze darted toward Peter, his expression cautious but grateful. Whoever you are, thank you for saving her, but…
what?
Yahiko muttered, his voice filled with disbelief.
How is this possible?
Nagato's Rinnegan eyes continued to glow, but now it was more from curiosity than rage. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. Those watching Yahiko, Nagato, and the other Akatsuki members could only stare in awe. Hanzo was renowned for his speed and strength, one of the most dangerous shinobi in the world. And yet this stranger, holding Conan no less, was moving as if Hanzo's attacks were nothing more than an inconvenience. Peter's students, Itachi and Shisui, stood off to the side, watching the exchange with wide-eyed fascination. It was clear that they were witnessing a level of skill far beyond anything they had seen before.
Whoa!
Shisui muttered under his breath, unable to hide his awe.
Isn't that Hanzo the salamander?
Itachi, though quieter, was equally mesmerized.
I think so, yeah.
His Sharingan eyes whirled, trying to keep up with Peter's movements. He had always known his sensei was strong, but seeing him effortlessly counter one of the strongest shinobi in the world made it all the more real. Peter glanced back at his students, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips.
Pay attention, you two. You might learn something.
Hanzo, hearing Peter's words, snarled in frustration. He launched another flurry of attack punches and kicks coming at Peter with deadly precision. Each blow carried the weight of a man who had mastered the art of combat, his strikes swift and brutal. But Peter moved like water. Every time Hanzo attacked, Peter either sidestepped, ducked, or twisted his body just enough to avoid the hit. His agility was almost unnatural, each movement perfectly timed to dodge Hanzo's strikes by the smallest of margins. Hanzo's fist flew toward Peter's face once again, but Peter tilted his head to the side, letting the punch sail past him. He pivoted on his heel, shifting Conan in his arms as he stepped behind Hanzo in a blur of motion. Before Hanzo could recover, Peter swept his leg out, kicking Hanzo's supporting leg from underneath him. The older shinobi stumbled, momentarily losing his balance, but he quickly caught himself and spun around, his eyes blazing with anger. Peter smirked, clearly enjoying himself.
Come on!
Hanzo growled in response, his pride wounded by Peter's taunts. He launched himself forward, faster this time, his fingers forming hand signs in a blur. In an instant, he released a torrent of flames from his mouth, the searing heat roaring toward Peter and Conan. But Peter, unbothered, leapt into the air with Conan still cradled in his arms, his movements fluid and graceful. He vaulted over the flames, the heat licking at his heels but never touching him. He landed softly on the ground a few feet away, still holding Conan securely. Watching from the sidelines, Nagato clenched his fists, his Rinnegan eyes wide as he watched the battle unfold. Yahiko, too, was tense, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing.
This guy.
Yahiko muttered, his eyes wide with disbelief.
Who is he? How is he moving like that?
Peter, noticing their reactions, decided to use the moment as a teaching opportunity for Itachi and Shisui.
You two watching.
He called over his shoulder, his voice calm despite the intensity of the fight.
Always remember power isn't everything. Speed, skill, and control are just as important.
Hanzo, hearing Peter's words, snarled in frustration.
Stop talking like you've already won.
He roared, forming another set of hand signs in a blur. This time, a massive wave of water erupted from the ground, crashing toward Peter like a tidal wave. Peter's eyes gleamed with excitement.
Time for the big finish.
As the wave of water surged toward him, Peter stood his ground. Just as the wave was about to crash down on him and Conan, Peter snapped his fingers and in the blink of an eye he vanished, reappearing behind Hanzo in an instant. Before Hanzo could even react, Peter struck him with a powerful, open-palm strike to the back, sending him flying forward. Hanzo's body skidded across the ground, crashing into the rubble with a thunderous impact. The entire battlefield fell silent. Yahiko, Nagato, and the remaining Akatsuki members could only watch in stunned silence as Hanzo, one of the most feared shinobi in the world, was effortlessly tossed aside like a rag doll. Peter, still holding Conan, glanced down at her, a playful smirk on his face.
You all right?
Conan, her face still slightly flushed from earlier, nodded silently, too stunned to speak. With the fight clearly over, Peter looked back at his students.
So boys, did you get all that?
Itachi and Shisui nodded, their eyes wide with awe. Peter shifted Conan in his arms once more, then turned his attention back to Yahiko and Nagato.
Now!
Chapter 689, C711 I Want Your Eyes. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 14 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert Excalibur gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, a /N, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S. Benbagman Trophy AN crown. Peter turned back to Yahiko and Nagato with a calm expression, Conan still cradled safely in his arms. His tone remained casual as he spoke.
Now where were we?
Yahiko and Nagato exchanged a look, still reeling from the display of power they had just witnessed. Their hearts raced as they stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. Fear and awe mingled in their gazes, the earlier tension between them and Hanzo completely overshadowed by the sheer force of Peter's abilities. They had been prepared to die moments ago, and now they didn't know what to do. Neither of them wanted to anger this man, especially with Conan still in his grasp. Their minds whirled with questions: who was he? What did he want? But none of those questions found their way to their lips. Instead, silence reigned. Seeing their hesitation, Peter sighed, lowering Conan gently to the ground. His grip on her loosened as she found her footing, but before she could fully straighten herself, Peter's voice softened.
Are you all right?
Conan blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the concern in his voice. A faint blush dusted her cheeks once again as she stammered.
Why, yes, I'm fine.
Her voice trailed off and Peter's eyes flickered briefly over her form. His gaze settled on the small injuries she bore, the marks of her earlier capture, and his expression darkened slightly. He raised his hand, and in an instant a golden spell circle appeared, glowing brightly as it hovered over Conan's body. The circle flared with light, and in the blink of an eye, Conan's injuries began to heal. Her bruises faded, the cuts and scrapes mended themselves, and even the tears in her clothing were restored to their original state. As the warm glow of the spell washed over her, Conan's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked down at her arms, then back up at Peter, her mouth opening slightly in surprise. But before she could say anything, Yahiko and Nagato, seeing the glowing circle and Peter's outstretched hand, assumed the worst. Without hesitation, both of them rushed forward, their fear for Conan's safety outweighing any hesitation they had about facing Peter.
Stop!
Yahiko shouted, his voice hoarse with panic.
Don't hurt her!
Nagato's chakra flared wildly, his Rinnegan eyes glowing fiercely as he leaped forward, prepared to defend Conan at any cost. But just as they appeared beside Peter, ready to intervene, they froze in place. Both Yahiko and Nagato watched in stunned silence as the spell circle continued to glow softly, its magic not causing harm but instead healing Conan's wounds. The tension in their bodies evaporated as they realized what was happening. Peter wasn't attacking her at all. He was helping her. The two men stood still, their eyes wide with disbelief as they watched Conan's injuries disappear completely. The golden glow of the spell faded, leaving her fully healed and looking as though she had never been touched by Hanzo's ambush in the first place. Yahiko's mouth opened slightly, his voice barely a whisper.
What?
Nagato, too, was speechless. His mind struggled to process what he had just seen. This stranger, had not only saved Conan but was now healing her without any apparent cost or effort. Peter stood, seemingly unbothered by their reactions, his eyes flicking over to Yahiko and Nagato with a raised eyebrow.
You two really need to relax.
He said with a small smirk.
I'm not here to hurt anyone.
As Peter's words hung in the air, the silence was broken by the sudden shift of movement. The small army of ninja that Hanzo had brought with him snapped out of their daze. They had just witnessed their leader once thought invincible get effortlessly defeated by Peter, but their loyalty ran deep. Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of their minds, they drew their weapons, steeling themselves for what had to be done. The majority of them rushed forward with killing intent, their eyes locked on Peter, determined to strike him down. Meanwhile, a few others broke away, heading toward Hanzo's prone form, desperate to check on their leader, who hadn't risen since Peter's devastating blow. Peter's spider senses flared, his head turning as he sensed the incoming threat. A grin tugged at his lips as he watched the ninjas charge at him, weapons gleaming under the rain. Conan, Yahiko, and Nagato noticed the approaching army as well, their bodies tensing as they prepared for another fight. But before they could react, Peter spoke, his tone casual and completely unbothered by the onslaught.
Hey, you two!
Peter called out, glancing over his shoulder at Madara and Kurama.
Deal with the underlings, will ya?
Madara, who had been observing the situation with a bored expression, sighed.
What a chore!
He muttered under his breath. Despite his irritation, he nodded, stepping forward. Kurama, on the other hand, grinned wickedly, his excitement palpable.
About time.
He growled.
Though working with him.
He shot a glare at Madara, his distaste clear. As the wave of Am ninja surged toward them, Madara and Kurama moved into action. Their presence alone was enough to send chills down the spines of their enemies, but loyalty to Hanzo kept the ninjas pushing forward.
Oh, and try to save a few for Shisui and Itachi.
Peter added as an afterthought, watching calmly from where he stood. Both Itachi and Shisui tensed at the mention of their names. They had never fought real ninja before, only trained back home in their village. For a brief moment, nerves flickered in their eyes, but they quickly steeled themselves. If their sensei wanted them to fight, they would. Silently, they drew their kunai, their grips tightening as they prepared for the battle ahead. The first wave of Am ninja clashed with Madara and Kurama, and it was clear from the very first strike that this was going to be a massacre. Madara moved with an eerie grace, his Sharingan spinning as he effortlessly dodged attacks, reading every move before it even began. One ninja, a sword raised high above his head, swung down at Madara with all his strength, but the Uchiha merely sidestepped, his movements so fluid that it looked as though he was gliding through the air. With a single twist of his wrist, Madara struck the ninja with a powerful open palm strike to the chest, sending him flying backward with a sickening crack. The man's body hit the ground hard, skidding to a stop several feet away, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Kurama, in contrast, was all raw power and aggression. His large form, now towering over the battlefield, tore through the ranks of the Am ninja like a beast unleashed. One unfortunate soul rushed at him with a spear, aiming to pierce through the fox's side, but Kurama merely laughed, his tails whipping out to meet the attack. The spear shattered into pieces as Kurama's tails slammed into the ninja's body, sending him crashing into the dirt with enough force to leave a crater in his wake. Blood sprayed from his mouth as he hit the ground, the impact leaving him broken and defeated.
Pathetic.
Kurama sneered, his red eyes gleaming with malice. More ninjas swarmed them, their attacks becoming more desperate, but it was clear that they stood no chance. Madara weaved through the chaos, every movement calculated and precise. He parried a kunai with ease, stepping inside his attacker's guard before delivering a lightning-fast kick to the man's ribs. The sound of bones cracking echoed through the rain-soaked battlefield as the ninja crumpled to the ground, writhing in pain. Kurama wasn't any kinder. His massive paws slammed into two more ninjas, their bodies ragdolling through the air before crashing into the ground with bone-shattering force. The fox's grin only grew wider, his thirst for battle evident in the way he relished each strike. It wasn't long before the small army was reduced to just two Aim ninja, both of whom were a little banged up, but in much better condition than their comrades. They could hardly believe that their comrades had been so easily decimated, fear written all over their faces. With a nod from Madara, the two remaining ninjas were kicked over to where Itachi and Shisui stood, both of them looking at the two children with fear and desperation in their eyes. Peter, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, stepped forward.
"All right, you two,"
He said, addressing the Aim ninjas.
"here's the deal. You and your beaten-up friends will be allowed to leave here unharmed as long as you beat these two kids in front of you."
He motioned to Itachi and Shisui. One of the remaining Aim ninja, blood trickling down the side of his face, turned to Peter with disbelief.
"Even?"
He asked, his voice shaky, yet filled with hope. Peter shrugged casually.
"Sure, even Hanzo."
Hearing this, the two Aim ninjas turned to face Itachi and Shisui. They exchanged a glance, the weight of their situation sinking in. They didn't want to harm the children, they had no personal quarrel with them, but this wasn't about morality anymore. This was about survival.
"We're sorry.
One of them muttered, his voice hoarse.
This isn't personal."
With that, they pulled their weapons, one with a pair of kunai, the other with a katana, and rushed at the two Uchiha children, their killing intent clear in their eyes. Itachi and Shisui, though nervous, felt the weight of the battle settling on their shoulders. They could feel their sensei's eyes on them, watching closely. This was a test, a moment to prove themselves. Their grips tightened on their own kunai, and they readied themselves for the fight to come. The two Aim ninjas stood ready, weapons drawn, their eyes locked on Itachi and Shisui. Despite their beaten bodies, they were determined to fight with everything they had. After all, their survival and the survival of their comrades and leader depended on it. Itachi and Shisui, though nervous, activated their Sharingan, their crimson eyes spinning into life. Itachi's Sharingan showed a single Tamo, while Shisui's eyes glinted with 3 Tamo in each. Their breath was steady, but their nerves were unmistakable as they faced off against their older, more experienced opponents. The Aim ninja moved first, attacking in tandem, their movements sharp and precise despite their injuries. The one with the katana surged toward Shisui with a swift, powerful slash aimed at his chest, while the other rushed Itachi, striking with a flurry of kunai aimed at his vitals. Shisui barely managed to parry the katana strike with his kunai, but the force behind the blow sent a jarring shock through his arm. He grit his teeth, trying to hold his ground as the Aim ninja pressed the attack, raining down slashes and thrusts with deadly precision. Itachi, meanwhile, was forced to retreat under the relentless barrage of kunai from his opponent. He dodged and deflected as best as he could, but the Aim ninja's speed and experience were evident, and Itachi found himself struggling to keep up. Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato watched the battle unfold with growing concern. Their eyes darted between Itachi and Shisui, worry etched into their faces as they saw the two children on the back foot. Yahiko glanced over at Peter, unsure of whether they should intervene.
"Is this really okay?"
Yahiko asked nervously, his voice low but filled with unease.
"They're just kids."
Konan, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, bit her lip.
Should we step in?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her gaze was fixed on Itachi and Shisui, watching as they struggled to keep up with their opponents.
They're so young.
Nagato remained silent but nodded in agreement with his friends. His worry for the children was obvious. Peter, standing beside them, glanced over with a calm, reassuring smile.
"They'll be fine."
He said confidently.
"It's about time they faced a real challenge."
Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato exchanged uncertain glances. They didn't want to argue, but the sight of Itachi and Shisui struggling made them feel uneasy. Conan frowned, her worry clear in her voice.
But what if they get seriously hurt?
Peter chuckled softly.
They might get a few scrapes and bruises, sure, but I won't let anything severe happen. Trust me, they need this.
Though they still had their doubts, Yahiko, Nagato, and Conan turned their attention back to the fight, trusting that Peter wouldn't let the kids get hurt too badly. Meanwhile, the battle raged on. Shisui dodged another katana strike, sweat dripping down his forehead as he narrowly avoided the blade. His Sharingan spun faster, analyzing his opponent's movements.
I need to turn this around.
He thought, his mind racing for a way to gain the upper hand. Itachi, on the other side, was still being pressed hard by the kunai-wielding Aim ninja. He was fast, but his opponent was faster. Every time Itachi tried to counter, the Aim ninja would slip out of reach, launching more kunai at him from different angles. Itachi felt the strain in his muscles, but he pushed through, his Sharingan locking onto the trajectory of the incoming attacks. Suddenly, Shisui saw his opening. The Aim ninja with the katana had overextended slightly on his last strike, leaving a small gap in his defense. Shisui moved quickly, slipping inside his opponent's guard. With a sharp twist, he disarmed the katana-wielding ninja, knocking the sword from his hands with a well-timed strike to the wrist. The Aim ninja's eyes widened in shock, but before he could recover, Shisui struck with a vicious elbow to the ribs, sending his opponent staggering back, coughing and clutching his side. Itachi, too, found his moment. His Sharingan picked up on the subtle movements of his opponent's hands, predicting the next volley of kunai before they were even thrown. He sidestepped the attack, dodging the kunai with ease and closed the distance in a flash. His kunai flashed through the air, knocking his opponent's weapons out of his hands before driving a powerful kick into the man's chest. The Aim ninja grunted in pain as he was sent sprawling to the ground, winded and disarmed. The tide had turned. Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato watched in awe as the two young Uchiha began to gain the upper hand. The tension in their shoulders eased slightly, though they still couldn't help but feel nervous for the kids. Shisui pressed his advantage, launching a barrage of strikes at his opponent, who struggled to keep up. The Aim ninja, still clutching his injured side, was forced to defend with his bare hands as Shisui's attacks rained down on him. Itachi, meanwhile, moved with newfound confidence, his Sharingan allowing him to stay one step ahead of his opponent. He dodged and weaved through the Aim ninja's desperate attempts to fight back, landing precise strikes that further weakened his foe. It wasn't long before the battle was decided. Both Aim ninjas were on their knees, beaten and exhausted, barely able to stay upright. Shisui and Itachi stood over them, their chests heaving as they caught their breath, their kunai raised, ready to finish the fight. But just as Shisui and Itachi prepared to strike the final blow, Peter's voice cut through the rain.
That's enough.
Peter said calmly, stepping forward. His tone was firm yet gentle.
You don't need to kill them.
Itachi and Shisui froze, their kunai still raised. They glanced at each other, then back at Peter, unsure of what to do. Peter smiled at them.
You've proven yourselves. There's no need to take their lives.
Slowly, Itachi and Shisui lowered their weapons, stepping back from their defeated opponents. The two Aim ninjas, their hopes crushed, slumped to the ground, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and despair. They had fought with everything they had, hoping to save their comrades and their leader, but in the end they had failed. One of the defeated ninjas muttered under his breath, his voice filled with disbelief.
But
Peter shrugged, his expression nonchalant.
True, you lost, but I'm not disappointed in your performance. You fought well.
He gestured toward the battlefield.
Take your comrades and go.
The remaining Aim ninja blinked in shock, unable to believe what they were hearing.
You're...
One of them asked, his voice shaking. Peter nodded.
Yeah, you're free to leave.
The ninja hesitated for a moment before glancing over at the unconscious form of Hanzo, still lying motionless on the ground.
And?
He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter sighed, glancing over at the fallen leader.
Sure, take him too.
He said before adding.
But when he wakes up, make sure Hanzo knows this is his only chance. If we meet again and I don't like what I see, I won't be so forgiving next time.
The two AIM ninjas, overwhelmed with gratitude, immediately bowed deeply toward Peter.
Thank you.
They said in unison, their voices filled with relief. Without wasting any time, the two ninjas began to gather their unconscious comrades and their leader, preparing to leave the battlefield. It would take some time, as most of the AIM forces were unconscious, but they worked quickly, desperate to get away. As they worked in the background, Peter walked over to Itachi and Shisui, who were still catching their breath after the hard-fought battle. He smiled warmly at them, his pride evident in his expression.
Well done, you two.
He said, his voice filled with approval.
You've both come a long way.
Shisui and Itachi, still breathing heavily, exchanged tired smiles. They were exhausted, but the sense of accomplishment filled them with a quiet pride. Before Peter could say more, Nagato, who had been watching the scene unfold in silence, stepped forward, his Rinnegan eyes gleaming in the rain.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Nagato began, his voice cautious.
But
Peter turned to face Nagato, a smile tugging at his lips.
I want your eyes.
Chapter 713, 713 C712 Not Yours, 1 years ago. Chapter 690, C712 Not Yours.
I want your eyes.
For a moment, Nagato simply stood there, his body rigid with disbelief. His hands instinctively moved to his face, fingers brushing over his Rinnegan, as if trying to confirm that his eyes were still there. He stared at Peter, searching for any hint of deception in his expression. Could he possibly be serious? Yahiko and Conan were quick to react, both stepping forward to shield Nagato. Yahiko positioned himself directly in front of his friend, his posture defensive, while Conan's sharp eyes darted between Peter and Midora. Their bodies were tense, ready to spring into action at any moment. Yahiko was the first to speak, his voice wary and filled with suspicion.
What do you mean, you want his eyes?
He asked, his tone hardening.
You saved us, but now you're asking for something like that. Why?
Peter remained calm, holding his hands up in a non-threatening manner, his voice steady and reassuring.
Relax.
He said smoothly, his tone casual as though this was a simple conversation between friends.
I don't mean I'm going to take them out of his head or anything. Well.
Yahiko's eyes narrowed further at Peter's words, his suspicion deepening.
That's not exactly comforting.
Conan, her face a mask of controlled worry, stood just behind Yahiko, her gaze locked onto Peter. She, too, didn't know what to make of this man anymore. First, he saved her, healed her injuries, and now he was making outrageous claims about Nagato's Rinnegan. Nagato, for his part, remained frozen in place, his mind racing as he tried to process what was happening. Why did this stranger want his Rinnegan? What was the real reason behind this sudden demand? Peter, sensing their rising tension, took a deep breath and decided it was time to explain.
Look.
He began, his voice measured and calm.
Nagato's Rinnegan.
The three of them stared at Peter as though he had just sprouted a second head. The disbelief was palpable, and it was clear that none of them bought his explanation. Nagato's grip on his own face tightened, his mind rejecting the idea immediately.
What are you talking about?
Nagato demanded, his voice tinged with frustration.
These are my eyes, they've always been mine.
Yahiko nodded in agreement, his eyes flashing with defiance.
You expect us to believe that nonsense, that the Rinnegan isn't his, come on.
Peter remained unflinching, his calm demeanor never faltering.
It's true.
He insisted, though he knew they wouldn't believe him at face value.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
At that moment, Midora, who had been standing quietly off to the side, stepped forward, his presence commanding and imposing. His gaze locked onto Nagato, his crimson Sharingan spinning lazily as he spoke.
You can't use those eyes, can you?
Midora asked, his voice cold and cutting. Nagato flinched visibly, the question striking him like a physical blow. His Rinnegan eyes, though they glowed with power, had always felt distant, foreign even. He had never fully been able to access their true potential, no matter how hard he tried. The others noticed Nagato's reaction. They knew he couldn't use his eyes, at least not yet, but concern still lingered. Yahiko quickly turned to his friend.
Nagato, you okay?
Madara continued, his voice low but steady.
The reason you can't use those eyes.
While Nagato had the potential to unlock the ability to use the Rinnegan, he hadn't done so yet, giving Peter and Midora some leverage in bartering for them. Nagato's heart pounded in his chest as Midora's words echoed in his mind.
What are you saying?
He whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Midora's gaze hardened.
Those eyes belong to me.
He said simply, his tone matter of fact. Nagato demanded, his voice tinged with frustration. These are my eyes, they've always been mine. Yahiko nodded in agreement, his eyes flashing with defiance. You expect us to believe that nonsense? That the Rinnegan isn't his, come on. Peter remained unflinching, his calm demeanor never faltering. It's true, he insisted, though he knew they wouldn't believe him at face value. But you don't have to take my word for it. At that moment, Midora, who had been standing quietly off to the side, stepped forward, his presence commanding and imposing. His gaze locked onto Nagato, his crimson sharing and spinning lazily as he spoke. You can't use those eyes, can you? Midora asked, his voice cold and cutting. Nagato flinched visibly, the question striking him like a physical blow. His Rinnegan eyes, though they glowed with power, had always felt distant, foreign even. He had never fully been able to access their true potential, no matter how hard he tried. The others noticed Nagato's reaction. They knew he couldn't use his eyes, at least not yet, but concern still lingered. Yahiko quickly turned to his friend. Nagato, you okay? Madara continued, his voice low but steady. The reason you can't use those eyes.
You're saying that Nagato's Rinnegan is yours. That's absurd.
Conan, too, was incredulous.
You expect us to believe that story. Anyone could make up something like that to steal his eyes.
Nagato's hands trembled slightly as they hovered near his face, his heart torn between disbelief and the gnawing feeling that there was some truth to Midara's words. He had always struggled to use the full power of his Rinnegan, but he had always assumed that it was because he wasn't ready, because he wasn't strong enough yet. But now,
I know this sounds crazy,
he admitted.
but it's the truth. He's not lying about this. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner we can move forward.
Nagato's heart pounded as the realization began to sink in. Could it really be true? Could these eyes, the Rinnegan, the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths, truly not belong to him? Peter stood silently as he observed the doubt and disbelief still etched into the faces of Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato. Despite his explanations and Midora's revelation, it was clear that the trio didn't fully trust his words. Their skepticism lingered in the air, thick and palpable. Realizing that words alone wouldn't be enough to convince them, Peter shrugged casually, his voice calm and unbothered.
Look, it doesn't matter if you believe us or not.
He said with a nonchalant wave of his hand.
The point is, I'm willing to make a trade. Anything you ask for in exchange for the Rinnegan. I'll even give Nagato some new eyes so he won't be blind for the rest of his life.
Yahiko's eyes narrowed at the offer, suspicion clear in his expression. He stepped forward, his tone firm as he responded.
Nagato's Rinnegan are the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths. Even if he can't fully use them right now, what could you possibly offer that would be equal to something like that?
Conan nodded in agreement, standing at Yahiko's side.
We don't want to fight you, but we can't agree to this.
Her voice was calm but resolute, and it was clear that they were preparing themselves for a confrontation if it came to that. Both Yahiko and Conan turned toward Nagato, silently encouraging him to stand his ground. Despite their gratitude for Peter's earlier help, they couldn't give away such powerful eyes, not even in exchange for a promise. The stakes were simply too high. But Nagato, standing silently behind his two friends, didn't seem as resolute. Unlike Yahiko and Conan, he couldn't ignore the overwhelming power he had just witnessed. Peter had taken down Hanzo, one of the most feared shinobi in the world, with ease. They had feared ever facing Hanzo, believing he was untouchable, and yet Peter had tossed him aside like he was nothing. Nagato's gaze lingered on Peter, and as the rain continued to pour, he swallowed his pride and spoke, his voice low but firm.
You said anything right.
Yahiko and Conan turned toward him, their eyes wide with alarm.
Wait, Nagato.
Yahiko began, his voice filled with concern, but Nagato cut him off, shaking his head.
Think about it, Yahiko.
Nagato said, his voice tinged with a mix of exhaustion and acceptance.
We can't fight him. You saw what he did to Hanzo.
He turned to Peter, his eyes resolute.
If this is the only way to protect our dream, then so be it.
Both Yahiko and Conan looked at Nagato with disbelief, their hearts sinking as they realized where this was headed. Conan stepped forward, her hand reaching out to Nagato.
You don't have to do this, Nagato. We'll protect you.
But Nagato shook his head again, more firmly this time.
No,
He said softly, his voice steady.
this is the only way.
Yahiko and Conan remained silent, though the unease in their eyes was clear. Their mission, their goal of bringing peace to Aimgakure was everything to them. It was why they had formed the Akatsuki in the first place. The Rinnegan, while a powerful weapon, wasn't what they had fought for. It wasn't what truly mattered. Nagato turned his gaze back to Peter, his decision made. As citizens of Aimgakure, we've suffered through countless wars. We were orphaned by the Second Shinobi World War. Yahiko, Conan, and I created the Akatsuki to bring peace to our home to stop Aimgakure from constantly being caught in the crossfire of the great Shinobi countries. His words were filled with a quiet determination as he looked Peter directly in the eyes.
If you can bring peace to my country.
Yahiko and Conan were touched by Nagato's words, their expressions softening as they realized what he was willing to sacrifice for their dream. Though it pained them, they couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice. Peter smiled as he heard Nagato's request. It wasn't about power or greed. Nagato's wish was simple, and it aligned with Peter's own ideals in a way.
You know what? I like you.
Peter said with a grin.
You've got a good heart.
He nodded, his smile widening as he looked at Nagato with approval.
All right, I'll do it. I'll bring peace to Aimgakure, you have my word.
Chapter 691, C713 Peace in Aimgakure. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 14 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert wiener, gifts pics here, most likes wins police car light /n, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, S Darkslayer trophy AN crown. As the rain continued to fall softly over Aimgakure, the tension between Peter and the trio Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato was peculiar. Peter had just promised something that seemed impossible, to bring peace to their war-torn village and their country. Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato stood there, still processing the monumental request they had made. They had assumed it would take months, maybe even years, to accomplish. Surely such a task required careful planning, diplomacy, and time. Lots of time. So when Peter suddenly turned to Midora, Kurama, and his students, Itachi and Shisui, with a casual grin on his face and said,
Okay, let's get this done now so we can get Midora's eyes and get home in time for dinner.
the 3 of them were stunned. Yahiko blinked in confusion, his mind struggling to keep up.
Wait,
He asked, his voice laced with disbelief.
you're going to bring peace to Aimgakure today.
Nagato and Conan shared equally baffled expressions. How could Peter possibly think he could accomplish such a massive task in such a short time? It seemed outlandish, even for someone who had displayed as much power as he had. They began to wonder if this had all been a trick, a way to scam them out of Nagato's Rinnegan. Before Yahiko or Nagato could voice their doubts, the question was asked for them. It was Itachi, Peter's youngest student, who spoke up, his voice filled not with skepticism but with pure excitement.
How are you going to do it, Sensei?
Shisui stood beside him, his eyes gleaming with the same anticipation, clearly eager to see what Peter had in store. Their expressions confused Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato even more. How could these children look so excited? How could they possibly believe that this man could bring peace to Aimgakure so quickly? Peter, unfazed by the confusion of the Akatsuki trio, grinned down at his students.
Just watch.
He said confidently.
I'll explain later.
With that, Peter raised his hands, the air around him crackling with energy. A glowing, golden spell circle materialized in front of him, hovering in midair. The circle was large, intricately detailed with strange symbols and lines that seemed to pulse with a soft, radiant light. It radiated power, so much so that even Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato could feel it from where they stood. Itachi and Shisui's eyes widened with awe, their gazes locked onto the spell circle. As Peter moved his hands, drawing new lines and symbols within the circle, the two children watched intently, their sharing and spinning as they tried to memorize every detail of the spell. Conan, Yahiko, and Nagato, though skeptical, couldn't tear their eyes away from the sight. There was something about the energy Peter was conjuring something that felt.
Hey, what's going on?
One villager asked, shading their eyes against the rain as they stared up at the glowing light.
I don't know.
Another responded, a sense of unease creeping into their voice.
But whatever it is,
Even from the hospital, where Hanzo and his ninja were being treated for the injuries they had sustained during their battle with Peter, the golden light was impossible to miss. One of Hanzo's elite ninja glanced out the window, his eyes widening in shock.
Lord Hanzo.
Hanzo, still weakened from the fight, struggled to sit up, his eyes narrowing as he saw the golden light shining above his village.
What?
Meanwhile, Peter continued to work, his hands moving deftly as he completed the spell. The giant golden circle was now fully formed, stretching across the entire village like a massive dome of light. It hummed with energy, the symbols within it shifting and swirling like they were alive. Conan took a step forward, her breath catching in her throat.
What?
She whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Peter, hearing her question, turned his head slightly, a small, satisfied smile on his face.
It's a barrier.
He explained simply, his voice calm yet commanding.
One that will protect this village from any outside threat. No more invasions, no more attacks. As long as this barrier stands, Aimgakure will have peace.
Yahiko's eyes widened, his heart pounding as he realized what Peter was doing.
You're...
Peter nodded.
That's right, this barrier will ensure that Aimgakure won't be caught in the crossfire of the great shinobi nations anymore. No one will be able to enter this village with hostile intent. As of today, Aimgakure is untouchable.
Nagato, still staring up at the golden light in the sky, felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Could it really be this simple? Could peace truly come to Aimgakure with just a wave of Peter's hand?
I don't believe it.
Yahiko whispered, his voice barely audible.
Is it really?
Peter turned to face Yahiko and Nagato, his expression softening.
Believe it?
He said.
I gave you my word, didn't I?
Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato could only watch in silence as the barrier settled into place, its glow illuminating their faces. They had spent their entire lives fighting for peace, and yet here it was, given to them in a matter of moments. Peter dusted his hands off as if the monumental task he had just completed was nothing more than an everyday chore.
All right.
He said with a grin.
Now that the barrier is done.
The three leaders of the Akatsuki turned to Peter, confused by what he meant, but before they could ask, Peter casually snapped his fingers. Instantly, the golden barrier glowed brighter for a brief moment before a pulse of light shot out from it, spreading rapidly across the entire village like a wave of energy. It moved swiftly through the streets, illuminating every corner and alleyway as it passed, scanning the entire population of Aimgakure. The villagers, already startled by the barrier's sudden appearance, now found themselves bathed in this strange light, unsure of what to make of it.
What's happening?
Yahiko muttered, his eyes wide as he watched the light sweep across the village. Nagato and Conan exchanged anxious glances, their hearts pounding in their chests. Was this part of Peter's plan? The light didn't seem to be harming anyone, but the sheer scale of it left them feeling uneasy. Conan's hands tightened into fists as she watched the spectacle unfold. The villagers, too, were growing more anxious by the second. Some looked up at the sky, shielding their eyes from the radiant glow, while others hurried indoors, seeking shelter from whatever mysterious force was now moving through their village.
Is it dangerous?
I don't know.
Another responded, a sense of unease creeping into their voice. But whatever it is.
But it's not hurting us.
The light continued to scan the entire village, moving over every building, every street, and every individual within Aimgakure. And just as suddenly as it had appeared, the pulse of light vanished, leaving behind nothing but the faint glow of the barrier overhead. For a brief moment, everything was still. The villagers looked around, confused and uncertain, their hearts pounding in their chests as they tried to make sense of what had just happened. But then something strange began to occur. All around the village, seemingly out of nowhere, dozens of people began to vanish in flashes of light. One by one, they disappeared, some from within their homes, others from the streets, and a few even from the shadows where they had been hiding. The sudden disappearances sent shockwaves through the village, with those nearby staring in confusion and fear.
What's happening? Where did they go?
One villager cried out, his voice filled with panic as he saw his neighbor vanish before his very eyes.
They just.
Another exclaimed, backing away in shock as the people around her began to blink out of existence. It didn't take long for the village to descend into chaos. People rushed through the streets, calling out for answers, unsure if they would be next. Mothers clutched their children close and friends huddled together, their eyes darting around in fear.
What is this?
Conan whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Her heart raced as she watched more and more people vanish in the distance.
Are they?
Peter, sensing the fear in the air, turned to Conan with a calm smile.
Don't worry.
He said reassuringly.
They're not dying. The barrier isn't harming anyone.
Nagato stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency.
Then,
Peter turned his gaze to the horizon, where beyond the village walls, a group of people began to materialize in flashes of light.
take a look for yourselves.
He said, pointing toward the group outside the barrier. Yahiko, Nagato, and Conan followed Peter's gesture, their eyes widening in disbelief as they saw the scene beyond the village. Outside the protective barrier, a large group of individuals had appeared, standing in confusion and panic as they tried and failed to re-enter Aimgakure. Yahiko's heart skipped a beat as he realized what was happening.
Those people.
Nagato's Rinnegan flared, his eyes focusing on the figures beyond the barrier.
But why?
Peter chuckled softly, his voice carrying a hint of amusement.
Those people you're seeing.
He began, folding his arms casually over his chest.
They're spies, assassins, criminals, all of them here in Aimgakure with ill intent. The barrier found them, scanned their minds, and then ejected them from the village.
Conan's eyes widened in realization.
You mean?
Peter nodded.
Exactly, it's not just a wall of protection. It's smart. It can sense anyone inside the village with malicious intent and if they don't belong here.
Yahiko, still trying to process what was happening, turned to Peter in disbelief.
You're telling me that all of those people.
Peter's expression darkened slightly, his eyes locking onto the group of individuals outside the barrier.
That's right, spies from other villages, hired assassins, wanted criminals.
Nagato clenched his fists, a wave of anger washing over him as he realized how deeply his village had been infiltrated.
All this time.
Peter's gaze remained fixed on the group outside the barrier, watching as they frantically tried to find a way back into the village. But no matter how hard they tried, the golden barrier remained impenetrable, keeping them locked out. The group of ejected individuals looked around in confusion, their panic growing with each passing second. Some of them tried to attack the barrier, launching jutsu and weapons at it, but their efforts were in vain. The barrier remained untouched, shimmering softly as it repelled every attack. Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato stood silently, watching the scene unfold. The sheer scale of what Peter had done creating a barrier that not only protected Aimgakure but also purged it of its enemies was beyond anything they could have imagined. Conan's voice was quiet as she spoke, her eyes still locked on the group outside the barrier.
You.
She whispered, her voice filled with a mix of awe and disbelief.
You've brought peace to Aimgakure.
Peter turned to her with a small, satisfied smile. He said with a grin, now that the barrier is done.
Now that we've cleaned house, it's time to settle the other matter.
He turned to Madara, his expression growing more serious.
Let's get your eyes back.
Chapter 692, see 714 New Eyes. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. The golden barrier glows softly above the village of Aimgakure, keeping the outside world at bay. Peter stood at the center of it all, his gaze turning serious as he declared.
All right, it's time to give Madara's eyes back.
Nagato tensed, his heart racing as Peter's words settled over him. His hands instinctively moved to his face, his fingers brushing over his rinnegan as if trying to reassure himself that they were still there. The weight of what was about to happen, the loss of his eyes, the thing that had defined him for so long made his stomach churn with uncertainty. Yahiko and Conan immediately moved closer to Nagato, their concern evident in their eyes. They could see the hesitation in his posture, the way his hands trembled slightly as they hovered near his face. Yahiko's voice was calm, but filled with concern as he spoke to his friend.
Negast.
He said gently, his eyes flickering to Peter and Midora, both of whom stood watching.
I know you made a deal, but if you're not sure, we can figure something out. We'll protect you, no matter what.
Conan nodded in agreement, her hand resting lightly on Nagato's arm.
It's your choice, Nagato. If you don't want to give them the Rinnegan, then maybe we can give him something else.
Nagato swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. His friend's support meant the world to him, but he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. Peter had already fulfilled his end of the bargain. He had brought peace to Aimgakure in a matter of hours, something they had all thought was impossible. Could he really back out of the deal now, after everything Peter had done? As if sensing his internal struggle, Peter's expression hardened slightly, his gaze shifting to Yahiko and Conan.
Nagato made a deal.
Peter said, his tone firm.
And that deal has been fulfilled on my end. Now it's time for him to fulfill his end of the bargain.
Conan's eyes narrowed, but she remained calm.
You said you would give him new eyes in return.
She reminded Peter, her voice steady.
You won't leave him blind, right?
Peter nodded, his expression softening slightly as he addressed Conan's concern.
That's right.
He said,
Once I get the Rinnegan, I'll give Nagato a new pair of eyes immediately. He won't be left in the dark.
Yahiko and Conan exchanged a glance, their expressions still filled with doubt, but they nodded in understanding. Even though they were still uncertain about the situation, Peter had shown that he was willing to honor his word. Still, they couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in their chests. Suddenly, Midora stepped forward, his presence imposing as he moved closer to Nagato. His crimson Sharingan spun lazily in his eyes as he looked down at the younger man, his voice cold and commanding.
We're not asking any more.
Midora said, his tone leaving no room for argument.
The Rinnegan belongs to me. It always has. It's time you upheld the deal or there will be consequences.
The weight of Midora's words hung heavily in the air, the threat clear. Nagato's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his mind spinning with 1,000 different thoughts. He didn't want to lose the Rinnegan, but
I'll do it.
he said, his heart heavy with the decision.
You've fulfilled your part of the deal, so I'll honor mine.
Yahiko and Conan both looked at Nagato with surprise, their eyes wide with disbelief.
Negast.
But Nagato cut them off, his voice firm as he shook his head.
No,
He said, more decisively this time.
this is the only way. I trust him.
Peter smiled, clearly pleased with Nagato's decision.
Good choice.
He said lightly, snapping his fingers. In an instant, a golden glow surrounded Nagato, enveloping him in a soft, ethereal light. His eyes widened as he felt a strange sensation, like the very power inside him was shifting, moving out of his control. Slowly, the glow intensified and Nagato felt the world around him begin to fade. Darkness crept into his vision, and for the first time in years, he felt truly vulnerable. The Rinnegan, once a part of him, floated from his eyes, hovering above Peter's outstretched hand. Nagato's heart pounded in his chest as he felt the Rinnegan leave him completely, the connection severed. The world went dark. Nagato stood still, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths as he adjusted to the sudden loss of his sight.
Don't worry.
He said softly, his tone gentle.
You won't be blind for long. I'm a man of my word after all.
Yahiko and Conan remained by Nagato's side, their hearts heavy with concern as they watched their friend stand blind and vulnerable. But they didn't speak. They trusted Nagato's decision, even if it pained them to see him like this. Meanwhile, Midora's gaze was fixed on the Rinnegan, expecting Peter to hand over his eyes immediately. But instead of doing so, Peter eyed the Rinnegan, a thoughtful expression crossing his face.
You know,
He said casually.
Before I give these back to you, Madara, I think I'll run a few tests on them.
Midora's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion flashing through his crimson Sharingan.
Tests?
He repeated, his voice cold and edged with irritation.
What are you talking about?
Peter waved a hand dismissively, his usual calm demeanor unwavering.
Relax, it won't take long.
He said, his tone light.
These are the highest level Sharingan and Rinnegan in existence. I'm curious to see how they work. If I can understand them well enough, I might be able to help Itachi and Shisui evolve their eyes into something like this.
At Peter's mention of his students, both Itachi and Shisui perked up, their eyes widening slightly as they glanced at the glowing Rinnegan. They had both been working to master their Sharingan, but the thought of achieving the Rinnegan or something even stronger made their hearts race with excitement. Peter's gaze flickered to them for a moment, a small smile tugging at his lips.
Or who knows?
He thought, turning his attention back to the floating Rinnegan.
Maybe I could even make myself a pair of powerful eyes. The Rin Sharingan in the show was pretty cool after all.
Midora's eyes narrowed further.
Fine,
He muttered.
but make it quick.
Peter, seemingly unbothered by Midora's growing impatience, raised his free hand and with a swift motion, began drawing glowing spell circles in the air around the floating Rinnegan. The circles were intricate, filled with runes and symbols that pulsed with a golden light, encircling the eyes as Peter began his analysis. The others watched in silence as the spell circles spun around the Rinnegan, each one emitting a soft hum as it gathered information. Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato exchanged confused glances, unsure of what Peter was doing. Even Itachi and Shisui, who had seen Peter use magic many times before, were watching with rapt attention. Yahiko, his voice filled with uncertainty, spoke up next.
Are you sure this is a good idea?
Peter, still focused on the spell circles, glanced briefly at Yahiko before offering a reassuring smile.
Relax, I'm just studying them.
He explained.
I want to understand how they work, that's all.
Midara, clearly growing more agitated by the second, took a step forward, his presence imposing.
You had better not damage them.
He warned, his voice low and dangerous. Peter met Midara's intense gaze without flinching.
I'm not going to damage them.
He said, his tone calm. For a moment, he felt nothing but fear of the unknown, fear of what would happen next. But despite the darkness surrounding him, there was also a sense of peace. He had honored his word, and in doing so, he had trusted Peter to do the same. Peter, the Rinnegan floating above his outstretched hand, glanced down at the eyes with a satisfied smirk before turning back to Nagato. Don't worry, he said softly, his tone gentle. You won't be blind for long, I'm a man of my word after all. Yahiko and Conan remained by Nagato's side, their hearts heavy with concern as they watched their friend stand blind and vulnerable. But they didn't speak. They trusted Nagato's decision, even if it pained them to see him like this. Meanwhile, Midara's gaze was fixed on the Rinnegan, expecting Peter to hand over his eyes immediately. But instead of doing so, Peter eyed the Rinnegan, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. You know, he said casually, before I give these back to you, Midara, I think I'll run a few tests on them. Midara's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion flashing through his crimson Sharingan. Tests? He repeated, his voice cold and edged with irritation. What are you talking about? Peter waved a hand dismissively, his usual calm demeanor unwavering. Relax, it won't take long, he said, his tone light. These are the highest level Sharingan and Rinnegan in existence. I'm curious to see how they work. If I can understand them well enough, I might be able to help Itachi and Shisui evolve their eyes into something like this. At Peter's mention of his students, both Itachi and Shisui perked up, their eyes widening slightly as they glanced at the glowing Rinnegan. They had both been working to master their Sharingan, but the thought of achieving the Rinnegan or something even stronger made their hearts race with excitement. Peter's gaze flickered to them for a moment, a small smile tugging at his lips. Or who knows, he thought, turning his attention back to the floating Rinnegan. Maybe I could even make myself a pair of powerful eyes. The Rin Sharingan in the show was pretty cool after all. Midara's eyes narrowed further. Fine, he muttered, but make it quick.
All right,
Peter said, lowering his hand as the final traces of the spell faded away.
I'm done.
Madara's eyes narrowed further, his patience clearly wearing thin.
And
He asked, his voice filled with barely concealed frustration.
what did you learn?
Peter smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement.
A lot.
He said cryptically, offering no further explanation.
But don't worry, your eyes are fine.
Madara sighed in relief, turning his attention back to the floating Rinnegan.
Here. Hold still.
Peter said softly as he approached Nagato. Nagato, though initially startled by Peter's words, did as instructed, standing still as Peter raised his hands once more. A soft golden glow enveloped Peter's palms as he began to weave his magic. This time, the spell was different, gentler, more focused. Nagato blinked, unsure of what Peter was about to do, but before he could ask, a warm sensation spread across his face. The golden light seemed to seep into his skin, and slowly but surely, something incredible began to happen. Peter wasn't giving Nagato someone else's eyes. He was healing him, regrowing his original eyes. Nagato's body shuddered as the magic flowed through him, and after a moment he let out a gasp. His knees buckled, and he collapsed briefly, his body trembling as he felt an overwhelming sensation of weakness wash over him.
Easy.
Peter said calmly, catching Nagato's arm to steady him.
You'll feel a little weak at first.
Nagato took a few deep breaths, his vision still blurry as he blinked repeatedly, trying to adjust to the sensation of having his original eyes again. But then, something remarkable happened. A wave of energy surged through his body, filling him with a sense of vitality he hadn't felt in years. His muscles, once worn and fatigued, felt stronger, and his mind, once clouded by the constant strain of the Rinnegan, felt clearer than ever. Peter stepped back, allowing Nagato to fully take in the transformation.
How do you feel?
He asked, a knowing smile on his face. Nagato blinked again, his vision now fully restored. He glanced around, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the world with his own sight for the first time in what felt like an eternity. His body felt. Nagato stammered, his voice filled with awe.
I feel amazing.
Yahiko and Conan, who had been watching in silence, rushed over to their friend, concern and joy mixing in their expressions.
Nagato,
Yahiko asked, his voice filled with hope.
are you okay?
Nagato nodded slowly, a look of disbelief still on his face.
Yes.
Peter crossed his arms over his chest, his smirk widening as he explained.
You see, the Rinnegan wasn't yours, so your body was constantly fighting to sustain it. It was draining your stamina and chakra at an alarming rate. That's why you always felt so weak. But now, with the Rinnegan gone and your original eyes restored, your body is finally back to where it should be.
Nagato's eyes widened in shock as Peter's words sank in. He had always assumed that the Rinnegan was the key to his power, the very thing that would someday make him strong. But in reality, it had been draining him this whole time.
I never realized.
Nagato muttered, his voice trailing off. He glanced at his hands, clenching them into fists as he felt the strength surging through his body. Yahiko and Conan stood beside him, both of them smiling with relief and happiness. For a brief moment, the trio celebrated together, their hearts light with relief and hope for the future. Nagato was free from the burden of the Rinnegan, free from the constant drain on his body, free to live his life as he had always dreamed, peacefully on Aimgakure. But just as they were beginning to smile and laugh, something changed. Nagato's body tensed suddenly, his eyes going wide with shock. A sharp, agonizing scream tore from his throat as he collapsed to the ground, clutching his head in pain.
Nagato.
Conan shouted, rushing to his side, her heart racing with fear. Yahiko knelt down beside him, his hands shaking as he tried to help his friend.
What's happening?
He cried out, his voice filled with panic. Nagato's eyes, now his original eyes, suddenly flashed a bright, unnatural blue, a light so intense it made Yahiko and Conan recoil in shock. Chapter 693, C715 Tensegan. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert Diddy gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, a /n, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's gift winner, S. Darkslayer Trophy AN Crown. As Nagato lay on the ground, clutching his head in pain, his body convulsing uncontrollably, Yahiko and Conan's panic grew by the second. The rain continued to pour down, mingling with their confusion and fear. Yahiko knelt beside his friend, his heart racing as he tried to understand what was happening.
Nagato!
Yahiko shouted, his voice hoarse with desperation.
What's going on? What's happening to you?
Conan knelt on the other side of Nagato, her arms wrapped around him as she tried to steady his trembling body.
Stay with us, Nagato.
She whispered, her voice trembling as her heart raced with fear. She could feel the tension coursing through his body, the pain evident in every shudder, but she had no idea how to help him. Nagato's screams pierced through the air, his hands clutching his head as if trying to contain something inside. His body shook violently, his muscles tensing and spasming uncontrollably. Yahiko's eyes darted up toward Peter, desperation clear in his gaze.
Peter!
He yelled, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and fear.
What the hell is happening to him? What did you do?
Peter remained calm, standing a few feet away, his eyes focused intently on Nagato. He hadn't done anything, and yet something unexpected was happening. Something new was awakening inside Nagato. He watched the scene with a look of mild curiosity, observing Nagato's convulsions as if it were an interesting puzzle. Without responding to Yahiko's frantic questions, Peter stepped forward, his movements slow and measured.
Move aside.
He said calmly.
Let me check on him.
Conan hesitated, glancing between Peter and Yahiko. Both of them were panicking, but Peter's calm demeanor gave her a small sense of hope. Perhaps he knew what was happening. Perhaps he could help. Reluctantly, she let go of Nagato and stepped back, allowing Peter to approach. Peter knelt beside Nagato, his eyes narrowing slightly as he raised his hand. A soft, golden light emanated from his palm, casting a gentle glow over Nagato's body. The rain glistened against the light, refracting in a halo around the two of them. Yahiko and Conan watched in tense silence, their hearts pounding as Peter began his diagnostic spell. The golden light scanned Nagato's body, starting with his head and moving down to his chest. The spell focused particularly on Nagato's eyes, which remained tightly shut, and Peter's expression shifted slightly as he took in the results of the scan. As the spell finished, Peter stood up, a surprised but satisfied expression crossing his face.
Well now.
He muttered under his breath.
This is interesting.
Yahiko, still frantic, took a step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides.
What's wrong with him?
He demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration.
Is he going to be okay?
Peter glanced at Yahiko, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips.
He's not in any danger.
Peter reassured them.
In fact, I'd say he's extremely lucky.
Before Yahiko could ask what Peter meant, Nagato's body began to glow. A soft, faint blue light radiated from his skin, growing brighter with each passing moment. The air around them seemed to thrum with energy, and Yahiko and Conan took a step back in shock as the glow intensified.
Negast.
Conan whispered, her eyes wide as she watched the blue light envelop her friend. Nagato's eyes remained tightly shut, but the light continued to pulse around him, growing stronger and stronger until it became almost blinding. Yahiko and Conan shielded their eyes from the intensity of the glow, while Peter simply stood there, watching with interest. Then, with a sudden burst of light, Nagato's eyes snapped open. The blue light that filled the area was almost unbearable, causing everyone present, Yahiko, Conan, Peter's group, and even Madara, to shield their eyes for a moment. The sheer force of the light was overwhelming, as if it were a living, breathing entity all its own. When the light finally began to fade, the intensity lessening, Yahiko and Conan hesitantly lowered their hands, their hearts pounding in their chests. They stared in disbelief at what they saw before them. Nagato's eyes were no longer the Rinnegan he had once possessed. Instead, they glowed with an icy blue hue, the irises swirling with intricate, otherworldly patterns. The power emanating from his eyes was unmistakable, but it was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Peter stood there, his grin morphing into a contemplative frown, as he muttered to himself.
I didn't expect this.
Yahiko, still in shock, stared at Nagato's glowing blue eyes, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what had just happened.
What?
Nagato, still disoriented from the intense pain and the sudden change, blinked several times, his vision slowly adjusting to the new power coursing through him. His body felt lighter, stronger, but his mind was filled with questions. What had happened to him? What were these new eyes? Peter looked at Nagato, a sense of amusement and intrigue in his gaze.
Congratulations, Nagato.
Peter said softly, his voice filled with genuine admiration.
You've just awakened the Tenseigen.
Yahiko and Conan stared at Peter in disbelief, their eyes wide as they processed his words.
The
Conan repeated, her voice filled with confusion.
what?
Peter remained calm, his gaze fixed on Nagato as he considered his response. After a brief pause, he began to explain.
Those are called the Tenseigen.
Peter said, his voice steady and serious.
It's a dojutsu that's on par with the Rinnegan. Very few people in this world even know about its existence.
Tenseigen.
Yahiko repeated, his brows furrowed in confusion.
I've never heard of it.
Peter nodded.
I'm not surprised. The Tenseigen is incredibly rare and nearly impossible to achieve. It's a combination of the Byakugan, those white eyes you might have heard about from the Hyuga clan, and Otsutsuki chakra. Normally, for someone to awaken the Tenseigen, they need to be from the Otsutsuki clan and receive a Byakugan from a Hyuga, or the other way around.
Conan's eyes widened as she absorbed this information.
The Byakugan. You mean the eyes that give full 360-degree vision and can see chakra points?
She asked, trying to understand. Peter nodded.
Exactly. When combined with the right chakra, the Byakugan can evolve into the Tenseigen, which grants not only Byakugan vision but also other abilities.
Gravity control, quite similar to the Rinnegan's Deva path. Shikitsamiyaku, the dead bone pulse of the Kaguya clan of Kirigakure. Tamagoroshi no Heikatsu, the all-killing ash bones of Otsutsuki Kaguya. Upon contact, the target will disintegrate into ash.
There may be other abilities as well.
Peter thought, but he wasn't sure. Yahiko and Conan exchanged a glance, their worry for Nagato clear in their eyes.
But how is that possible?
Yahiko asked, his voice tinged with disbelief.
Nagato's not a member of the Hyuga clan. How could he have unlocked something like this?
Peter's brow furrowed in thought.
That's the part I'm still trying to figure out.
He admitted.
For someone like Nagato to awaken the Tenseigen.
Nagato, who had been silent as he adjusted to the overwhelming sensation of his new eyes, finally spoke, his voice quiet but filled with curiosity.
My heritage.
He echoed, his gaze lifting toward Peter, though his eyes were still filled with uncertainty.
What do you mean?
Peter sighed softly, crossing his arms as he considered the possibilities. The Tenseigen requires a connection to both the Otsutsuki and the Hyuga. He explained, you already have Otsutsuki chakra, that much is clear from possessing Madara's Rinnegan, but the Byakugan is supposed to be the key. It's possible that one of your parents was a Hyuga and you never knew. If that's true, then your eyes carried the potential for this transformation all along. Nagato blinked in surprise, his mind reeling with the implications. His heart raced as he considered what Peter was saying.
A Hyuga.
He murmured, his voice filled with disbelief.
But I've always been an orphan. I never knew my parents.
Conan and Yahiko exchanged a worried glance, sensing the turmoil Nagato was experiencing.
Negast.
Conan began softly, her hand resting on his arm. If this is true. Nagato's heart skipped a beat at the thought. Family? He had lived his entire life without knowing his heritage, without ever feeling the warmth of a family. Could it really be possible that he had living relatives? His mind swirled with questions, his emotions conflicted as hope and uncertainty warred within him. Peter watched Nagato's reaction closely, understanding the weight of what he had just revealed. He had seen the same reaction from others in similar situations, orphans who discovered they had family after years of living in isolation. It was a difficult reality to process, but it also opened up new possibilities for Nagato's future. Yahiko placed a reassuring hand on Nagato's shoulder.
If this is true, Nagato,
He suggested,
you might find answers there. And if you really are connected to the Hyuga clan, they might help you train your new eyes.
Conan nodded in agreement, her voice gentle.
We've spent our lives fighting for peace in Aimgakure, but you deserve to know who you are, Nagato. Maybe this is your chance to find out.
Nagato's mind raced as he considered their words. For so long, he had defined himself by the pain and suffering of his past. But now, for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, a chance to discover something more, something beyond the endless cycle of war and destruction. After a moment of silence, Nagato nodded slowly, his voice quiet but determined. He said, his gaze steady.
I want to find out if I have family in Konoha. If there are answers there, I need to see them for myself.
Yahiko and Conan smiled, their relief evident as they saw the resolve in Nagato's eyes. Despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, they knew this was a step Nagato needed to take. Peter, watching the scene unfold, grinned slightly.
Well, it looks like we've got a plan.
He said with a wave of his hand, opening a golden portal.
Konoha it is.
Chapter 694, C716 Neji. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. As the golden portal swirled open at the gates of Konoha, Peter stepped out first, followed closely by Madara, Kurama, his students Itachi and Shisui, and finally Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato. The warm afternoon sun bathed the village in a peaceful light, casting long shadows as it filtered through the trees. The sound of birds chirping filled the air, a stark contrast to the perpetual rain that had become the soundtrack of Yahiko, Conan, and Nagato's lives back in Aimgakure. Nagato blinked, his newly awakened eyes adjusting to the vibrant colors around him. Yahiko stood still for a moment, his mouth slightly agape as he took in the bustling village, his head turning to observe the children playing in the distance and the relaxed demeanor of the villagers. Conan's gaze was softer, more contemplative, but no less awed by the tranquility of this place.
It's so.
Yahiko muttered under his breath, his voice tinged with disbelief.
It's hard to believe a place like this exists.
Conan nodded, her eyes following the movements of a young couple walking hand in hand, laughter and joy in their steps.
Compared to home.
Nagato remained silent, his thoughts clouded by the contrast between the peace here and the endless struggle they had known. He glanced at Yahiko and Conan, seeing his own feelings mirrored in their expressions. But something else lingered in the back of their minds.
Do you think we'll see him here?
Conan asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of nostalgia. Yahiko's lips tightened into a thin line.
It's been so long.
His voice trailed off as he glanced toward Nagato.
What do you think, Nagato? Do you think Jiraiya-sensei is still here?
Nagato frowned, his mind racing back to their memories of their mentor.
I don't know.
He replied softly.
But if he is, I suppose we'll find out soon enough.
As they exchanged these words, a hush fell over the crowd near the gates. The villagers and travelers, some lined up to enter the village, parted like the sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear as they noticed Peter and his group stepping through the portal. Whispers spread quickly among the gathered crowd, and even the gate guards tensed, reaching for their weapons as they prepared to stop the newcomers from entering. But before they could act, a group of Ambu appeared, materializing from the shadows like specters. Their masked faces turned toward the guards, and the leader of the Ambu team, a tall figure with sharp, alert movements, stepped forward. He moved with purpose, stopping the gate guards with a mere glance. The Ambu leader then turned to Peter, bowing deeply and with great respect.
Welcome back to the village, Peter.
The Ambu leader said, his voice reverent.
The Hawkage has requested your presence at your earliest convenience.
The crowd around them murmured in astonishment. The way the Ambu addressed Peter, combined with the fact that the Hawkage was asking rather than demanding his presence, left them wondering who this mysterious figure was. Even the merchants and officials waiting at the gate began to eye Peter with newfound interest, recognizing that he held a significant position within Konoha. One merchant, a man dressed in opulent robes and flanked by a group of attendants, saw an opportunity. He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with ambition as he prepared to speak. Perhaps, with Peter's favor, he could secure special treatment or favorable terms for his dealings. But before he could utter a word, another group of Anbu appeared, kunai gleaming in the sunlight as they pressed the blades against the merchant's throat, as well as the necks of his attendants. The merchant froze, his face draining of color as he realized the severity of his mistake.
Step back.
One of the Anbu growled. The merchant swallowed hard, nodding vigorously as he and his attendants stumbled backward, their ambitions snuffed out as quickly as they had arisen. Unfazed by the scene behind him, Peter nodded in acknowledgement to the Ambu leader.
Thank you, I'll visit Minato once I've handled a few things.
The Ambu leader bowed again before stepping aside, clearing the path into the village. Peter moved forward, his expression calm as ever, his companions following in step. Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato hesitated for a moment, still overwhelmed by the grandeur of the village and the respect Peter commanded. But soon they fell into line, their thoughts racing as they took in their surroundings. As they crossed the gates, Shisui leaned toward Itachi, his voice filled with admiration.
Sensei is so cool.
He muttered under his breath, unable to hide the awe in his tone. Itachi, usually more reserved, gave a slight nod of agreement.
He is.
He said simply, his eyes fixed on Peter as they entered the village. As they made their way deeper into the village, the streets gradually grew quieter as they approached, the once busy village now giving way to a more exclusive area where only members of the Hyuga clan resided. Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato trailed behind Peter, still taking in the sights of the village. Their expressions were a mix of awe and hesitation, their minds wrestling with the weight of the journey they were about to embark on.
We're heading to the Hyuga clan.
Peter explained, his eyes focused ahead.
If Nagato has any relatives in the village, this is where we'll find them. And even if he doesn't, with his new eyes, the Hyuga won't be foolish enough to turn him away.
Nagato, still grappling with the strange power coursing through his body, gave a small nod. He trusted Peter's judgment, even if he was still unsure about the implications of this newfound connection to the Hyuga. As they approached the gates of the Hyuga compound, 2 guards stationed at the entrance immediately stiffened at the sight of Peter and Madara. Their eyes widened with fear and recognition, their hands trembling as they quickly bowed and stepped aside, making way for the group to enter.
Welcome to the Hyuga compound.
One of the guards stammered.
Please, you are invited inside. The clan head has instructed us to be ready for your arrival, should you ever come.
Without a word, Peter nodded and continued forward, his presence commanding respect without effort. Yahiko and Konan exchanged uneasy glances, while Nagato silently followed, his thoughts fixated on what lay ahead. Meanwhile, inside the main residence of the Hyuga clan, Hayashi Hyuga sat with his brother Hisashi. They spoke quietly, tense looks on their faces. Hisashi's forehead bore the unmistakable mark of the caged bird seal, a symbol of the oppressive power dynamic between the main and branch families of the Hyuga.
The elders.
Hayashi muttered, his frustration evident.
Even after all these years, they cling to their power over the branch family, using that cursed seal as a tool for control.
Hisashi, head of the branch family, sighed deeply.
It's not just about the seal, brother. The system itself is designed to keep us divided, and as long as the elders remain in power, they'll keep using the seal to suppress us.
Hayashi's fists clenched.
I despise seeing you wear that mark. If I could, I would have it removed today. But we can't act rashly.
Hisashi replied, his voice calm but firm.
We need to be strategic. The elders won't give up their hold so easily.
Soon enough, their conversation was interrupted when a Hyuga ninja appeared before them, kneeling respectfully. Hayashi's brow furrowed, ready to scold the interruption, but before he could speak, the ninja delivered his message.
Forgive my intrusion, Hayashi-sama, Hisashi-sama. Peter and Madara Uchiha have arrived at the gates and are on their way here.
Hayashi and Hisashi both froze, their eyes widening. The weight of the situation hit them instantly as they stood from their seats, exchanging a look of disbelief.
Lead us to them.
Hayashi commanded, his tone suddenly much more serious. The brothers moved swiftly, following the ninja out of the room. As they stepped into the front courtyard of the clan head's residence, Hisashi's 1-year-old son, Neji, was playing on the lawn, while Hayashi's wife sat nearby, cradling their newborn daughter, Hinata, alongside Hisashi's wife. As the 2 wives saw Hayashi and Hisashi walk out, they smiled, thinking the meeting must be over, about to greet them, but their words caught in their throats as they noticed the worried expressions on their husbands' faces. Following their gazes, they saw Peter and his group approaching the courtyard. Shisui, Itachi, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato followed closely behind, while Madara and Kurama walked at each of Peter's sides. The atmosphere grew tense, the weight of Peter's power and reputation palpable. Neji, oblivious to the tension, toddled up to the group, his small legs carrying him quickly to Peter. The toddler looked up at Peter with wide eyes, frowning in concentration.
Why you?
Neji stammered, his voice full of childish innocence.
You?
The courtyard fell silent, every eye now on Peter and the small boy. Hisashi and his wife's hearts clenched with fear, their breaths catching in their throats as they watched the scene unfold. They knew of Peter's power, and the stories they had heard of him were enough to make anyone wary. To see their son boldly reprimanding Peter was enough to send them into a panic. Before they could rush forward to apologize, Peter knelt down, a smile on his face as he looked at the brave little boy.
It's okay.
Peter said gently.
I was invited, so I shouldn't get in trouble.
But as he spoke, his eyes caught sight of the mark on Neji's forehead, the cursed caged bird seal. His smile faltered, turning into a deep frown. The atmosphere around him shifted, and once again, the tension in the air skyrocketed. Hisashi's heart sank as he hurried forward, bowing deeply.
Forgive my son's rudeness.
Peter cut him off, his eyes still focused on Neji's forehead. Slowly, Peter raised his hand, his finger glowing with a soft golden light. Hisashi froze, his breath catching in his throat as he watched in fear. With a swift motion, Peter flicked Neji on the forehead. The world seemed to stop as Neji flinched, holding his stinging forehead with a confused expression, tears welling up in his eyes.
Why'd you do that?
Neji asked, his voice a mixture of anger and fear. Peter smiled again, this time more warmly.
You had this ugly mark on your forehead.
He explained casually.
I did you a favor and got rid of it.
Hisashi blinked, confusion and disbelief flooding his mind.
That.
He began, shaking his head.
A flick can't remove the caged bird seal.
Chapter 695, C717 Hyuga Reckoning. Check out early access chapters on my Patreon, currently 7 chapters ahead. Patreon.com/alien warlord stop sign. Police car light insert PTSD gifts pics here. Most likes wins police car light, /N, only 2 entries per person. Trophy yesterday's GIF winner, Benbagman Trophy AN Crown. The air seemed to freeze in the Hyuga courtyard as the implications of Peter's actions began to sink in.
Thank you. Hayashi,
She whispered, her voice filled with concern.
what will the elders say? You know they won't allow this.
Hayashi's expression darkened, his gaze flickering toward the entrance to the courtyard.
I know, and we won't have to wait long to find out. They're already here.
As if summoned by Hayashi's words, a group of 5 elderly Hyuga men and women in ornate robes entered the courtyard. Their expressions were stern, their movements deliberate as they made their way toward Peter and the others. Hayashi's stomach tightened at the sight of them, knowing all too well what their presence meant. These people were the true power behind the Hyuga clan elders whose influence extended far beyond his title as clan head. They had the authority to overrule his decisions, and in most cases, they acted as the final word on all matters. The elders approached, their eyes scanning the courtyard with cold precision. Though they were outwardly respectful, Hayashi could sense the discomfort in their expressions. They didn't want Peter here, and they certainly didn't want him meddling in the affairs of the Hyuga clan. But they weren't foolish enough to cross him directly. Even they understood that Peter held the power to destroy the Hyuga if he so wished. One of the eldest, a stern-looking man with a long white beard, took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Hisashi and his wife on their knees before Peter. His lips curled in disdain, assuming the worst.
Have you offended our guest?
The elder demanded, his voice sharp.
Why are you groveling like that?
Before either Hisashi or his wife could respond, the elder formed a hand seal, his fingers moving in a practiced motion.
If you've disrespected Peter, I'll have to remind you of your place.
Without warning, the cursed seal on Hisashi's forehead activated, followed by his wife's. Both of them screamed in pain, clutching their heads as the familiar, agonizing sensation tore through their minds. Their bodies convulsed, unable to resist the torment inflicted by the seal. Neji watched in horror, his small voice trembling as he called out to his parents.
Mom, Dad.
The elders froze, their eyes snapping toward Neji. It was then they realized the boy wasn't writhing in pain alongside his parents. He stood there, untouched, his eyes wide with panic. One by one, the elders' gazes shifted to Neji's forehead. Where the cursed seal should have been, there was nothing. The mark had vanished.
What?
One of the female elders muttered, her voice filled with disbelief.
The seal.
Meanwhile, Madara stood at Peter's side, his eyes narrowing as he observed the chaos unfolding before him. His lips curled in disdain as he watched Hisashi and his wife writhing in pain, their bodies contorting under the torture of the cursed seal. The screams that echoed through the courtyard didn't faze him, but the barbarity of the act itself struck a chord deep within.
How barbaric!
Madara muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with contempt.
Even in my time, the Uchiha never stooped to something like this. And our eyes are worth far more than some pathetic Byakugan.
His sneer deepened as he cast a cold glance at the 5 elders. The elders, now fixated on Neji's unmarked forehead, turned livid. Their once measured and respectful demeanor toward Peter evaporated, replaced by an ugly rage. They marched past Hisashi and his wife, completely ignoring their agonized cries and their sobbing son. The child's pleas fell on deaf ears as the elders stormed up to Hayashi and his wife, their faces twisted with fury.
Hayashi, how dare you remove the seal from Neji?
One of the elders spat, their voice filled with venom.
Do you think you're above the traditions of this clan? How could you do something so reckless?
The others joined in, their voices rising in anger as they berated Hayashi and his wife, forgetting entirely about Peter and his group in their outrage. Hayashi stood there, silent and seething, his fists trembling at his sides as he watched his brother and sister-in-law writhing in pain. The desire to strike down the elders where they stood gnawed at him, but he knew he couldn't act on it. As much as he wanted to end this nightmare, his position as clan head was tenuous, and the elders held too much power.
They'll die if you hold the seal any longer.
Hayashi finally said through gritted teeth, his voice straining to maintain calm.
Please.
One of the elders sneered, their lips curling into a cold smile.
Why should we care if they die?
He asked, his tone dripping with malice.
They aren't from the main family. Their lives are insignificant.
Hayashi's fists clenched tighter, his knuckles white as he fought to keep control. He could feel his blood boiling, his restraint thinning with every passing second. The casual cruelty with which they dismissed his brother's life was almost too much to bear. His body shook, his eyes burning with a barely contained rage. Just as Hayashi was about to snap, a soft voice cut through the tense air.
How unsightly!
The words were spoken calmly, but they carried a weight that instantly silenced the courtyard. Everyone turned their eyes to Peter, who had begun walking toward Hisashi and his wife. The elders, mistaking Peter's comment for disdain toward the suffering couple, exchanged smirks and sneered.
We apologize, Peter.
One of the elders said, chuckling.
For showing you such an unsightly pair. If you wish, you can end them yourself. After all, they're only from the branch family. Their lives don't matter.
Peter's steps didn't falter as he reached Neji, who stood beside his parents with tears and snot streaming down his face. Kneeling down, Peter gently patted the boy's head, his gaze softening as he looked at the crying child. Neji looked up at Peter, his small voice trembling as he begged.
Please.
Peter smiled warmly at the boy.
Sure.
He replied softly. Then his eyes shifted back to the elders, and the warmth disappeared, replaced by a cold, unyielding glare that froze them in place.
I wasn't talking about them.
Peter said, his voice low and dangerous.
I was talking about you.
The smirks on the elders' faces vanished in an instant, replaced by fear. Peter's gaze alone was enough to make them tremble, and for the first time, they seemed to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Peter then turned back to Neji, his expression softening once more.
Don't worry.
He reassured the boy.
They'll be fine.
With a simple snap of his fingers, golden light flared briefly around Hisashi and his wife. In an instant, the cursed seals on their foreheads vanished, the pain dissipating as quickly as it had come. Both of them let out relieved sighs, their bodies relaxing as they collapsed to the ground, unconscious but alive. Neji's eyes widened in disbelief as he watched his parents' pain vanish before his eyes. He rushed forward, tears streaming down his face as he hugged them both.
Mom, Dad.
Peter stood, watching the reunion with a soft smile.
They'll be fine.
He said quietly.
They just need to rest.
The elders, who had been reduced to trembling silence, now stood frozen, too afraid to move. Peter's glare bore down on them. Despite the fear that choked her voice, one of the elders managed to stammer out.
You.
Peter scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain.
Your law, huh?
He crossed his arms, a dark smirk tugging at his lips.
You know, I don't think I like the Hyuga clan.
Beside Peter, a low chuckle rumbled as Kurama stirred.
Should we exterminate them?
The nine-tailed fox growled, his sharp fangs glinting. His question hung in the air like a threat, his gaze locked on the elders, clearly enjoying this. Madara, who had been watching the scene with cold amusement, smirked, his voice laced with dark satisfaction.
For once, I agree with the furball.
Kurama's growl rumbled louder at the name, his fiery eyes flickering with annoyance, but he didn't bother to respond. Instead, he kept his attention fixed on the elders, savoring their growing fear. Hearing the words,
Exterminate?
and sensing the lethal intent in the air, Hayashi stepped forward quickly, his face pale but determined. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed as he begged.
Please spare my clan. Punish the elders if you must, but don't destroy the Hyuga.
The elders, hearing Hayashi's desperate plea, turned on him instantly, their fear giving way to anger.
Hayashi, you coward.
One spat.
How dare you throw us to the wolves? You are supposed to protect the clan.
Peter watched the exchange with a flicker of amusement in his eyes. When Hayashi looked up, Peter could see the calculation behind his request. He wasn't just trying to save his clan, he was using this opportunity to rid himself of the elders, something Peter found himself willing to facilitate. Peter nodded slowly, his voice casual as he said,
All right, but if I'm going to help you pull some weeds, I might as well pull them all.
The elders paled, their fear returning tenfold. They scrambled to their knees, begging Peter for mercy. Please spare us, we'll change, we'll. Peter ignored their pleas, his eyes shifting to Madara.
Madara, deal with these elders and get them to give you every name of those who have misused the branch family seal to abuse their power.
Madara's smirk widened, his Sharingan spinning lazily as he stepped forward.
And what should I do with them once I have the information?
He asked, his voice thick with dark anticipation. Peter tilted his head toward Kurama, whose smirk widened dangerously.
Give the information to Kurama.
Peter replied.
He'll handle exterminating the vermin hiding in the Hyuga clan.
Kurama chuckled, the low, menacing sound causing the elders to tremble even more. Before Peter could say anything else, Yahiko stepped forward, flanked by Nagato and Konan. Yahiko's eyes gleamed with righteous fury as he said,
We'll help with that as well. This kind of injustice shouldn't be allowed to continue.
The elders' pleas for mercy grew more frantic as they realized their fates were sealed. Desperation setting in, they made a last-ditch effort to escape. In a swirl of leaves, they disappeared from sight, their decades of training and experience as ninja kicking in. But they weren't the only ones with that skill. In an instant, Madara vanished as well, his smirk widening as he pursued them. Barely a second passed before they reappeared in the courtyard, Madara standing over the elders with his arms crossed.
Too slow.
The once proud Hyuga leaders lay on the ground, their legs broken, their anguished screams echoing just as loudly as Hisashi's had moments earlier. Peter sighed, kneeling down to shield Neji's eyes from the sight.
No need to scar the kid.
He muttered, shooing Madara away.
Take them somewhere else.
Madara rolled his eyes, his tone dry.
I killed my first man at his age.
He said, clearly unbothered, but seeing Peter's look, he complied without further complaint. He gathered the screaming elders, disappearing with them once more. As the chaotic scene dissipated, Peter rose to his feet, dusting off his hands as if nothing had happened. His expression turned serious as he walked up to Hayashi, who was still kneeling, his mind reeling from the events that had just transpired.
Now,
Peter said, his tone shifting back to business.
onto the matter that brought me here in the first place.
Hayashi blinked, momentarily stunned by the sudden change in tone.
Yes,
Peter glanced over his shoulder at his group, then pointed directly at Nagato.
I have a long-lost family member of yours who's hoping to see if he has any direct relatives here in the village. Would you be able to help?
Hayashi's brow furrowed, his gaze sweeping over the group. His eyes lingered on Nagato, noting the unusual color of his eyes but not quite understanding.
A family member?
He asked, confused.
but
Peter's smirk returned, a knowing gleam in his eyes.
That's because Nagato here doesn't have the Byakugan. He has something much stronger. He has the Tenseigan.
Hayashi furrowed his brow.
The Tenseigan!
He echoed, unfamiliar with the term. Peter nodded.
An evolved and much more powerful version of the Byakugan.
Chapter 697, New story is out, Demon Heir. New fanfic is out, it's called Demon Heir.